Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is the part 3 of What If Naruto Had Temari as his personal maid. But before we start, please support for more amazing content. And consider subscribing to my channel, share this video with your friends, and now let's start the video. Reflection of self. From the moment after she had woken up, Temari was bothered by something. Even though Naruto had just told her about the demon sealed inside him the day before, she couldn't help but wonder why he hadn't told Gaara yet. Surely her brother must have noticed something during the fight between the two of them a few months ago. As she got dressed and slipped quietly out of her room, she couldn't restrain herself and opened the door to the bedroom next to her. And peeked through the narrow crack at the boy that had somehow captured her heart. She laughed softly as she saw Naruto snoring loudly with his mouth half open with his limbs thrown carelessly around him at wide angles. The blue blanket that was part of his futon that only covered his right leg and his stomach completed the picture. In a slightly morbid way, he looked positively cute and Temari shook her head as she closed the door and went downstairs to cook up some breakfast in the kitchen. Any other day she would have gladly barged loudly into his room, screeching for him to wake up, but not today. Today she would employ another method of waking him up, and from what she had seen in the time she had been around him, this was 100% foolproof. Therefore, she wasn't surprised at all that after she had grabbed a large wok and a batch of ingredients from the cabinets and refrigerator and had started cooking, she heard a loud banging from upstairs mixed with some mild cursing. Only moments later, a blonde blur came crashing down the stairs screaming, "Ramen!" All the while and only stopped when Temari whacked him sharply on the head with her much-feared spatula. Naruto looked at her with a slightly hurt expression and pouted. She had rudely interrupted his ramen-induced craze and he didn't like it when anyone did that. It wasn't his fault that ramen was so delicious, was it? He folded his arms in front of his chest and sat down on one of the chairs lining the kitchen table. Naruto's face cleared though, after he had sniffed the air a couple of times. There was something new to the smell of ramen today. It smelled better than the instant ramen and the ramen from Ichiraku stand. He turned his head towards Temari, who was now humming softly and busily stirred the food in the large black wok. Starting to get slightly impatient, Naruto jumped up and grabbed 2 large white bowls from one of the kitchen cabinets and 2 pairs of chopsticks from one of its drawers. He sat back down, separated his chopsticks and began tapping them on the kitchen table for no other reason than to distract him of his growling stomach. As it gave a particularly loud growl, Temari stopped humming her own personal tune and placed the wok on the table with a loud clang. She watched him fill up the 2 bowls swiftly, and only when the seemingly starved boy downed his first bowl and immediately filled it up again did Temari voice her concerns. Naruto-kun, she started hesitantly. Naruto uttered, face hidden behind the bowl from which he was currently slurping the last dredges of his second helping. Inwardly grimacing, Temari couldn't help but wonder in amazement how he could eat so much in so little time and yet not throw up. She shrugged it aside and decided that there was no point beating around the bush. "Have you talked to Gaara yet?" The blonde boy looked at her with a puzzled expression and scratched his left ear. "Of course I've talked to him." "You have?" Temari sighed in relief and sunk back into her chair. "So he knows too." Now Naruto was really confused and cocked his head sideways slightly. "Knows what?" Relief quickly turned into anger as the girl clutched her chopsticks tightly in one of her fists and was just about to use them and show Naruto that she was called a sand devil for a very good reason. Of course, Naruto was completely oblivious to this fact and only continued to look at her in polite confusion. Temari gritted her teeth and tried to calm herself. Her boyfriend would be of no use to anyone dead. "About what you told me last night. That's what." "Oh," Naruto said simply and looked down at the wooden table. "No, I haven't yet." The glare that had just moments radiated from her emerald orbs softened to a sympathetic look. "I know it's difficult, Naruto-kun. But," she paused there momentarily to put a gentle finger under his chin and forced him to look into her eyes. "My brother needs someone who understands, and so do you." There, she had said it. Mentally though, she questioned herself on when she had become so wise, but she liked it regardless. If Naruto would talk to her brother, Abe, he could break down Gaara's shell even further and turn him into an actual likable person. Sure, He had shown lots of improvement and she was grateful, but other people judged only on first appearances and she didn't want her brother to be shunned like he was when they were younger. Naruto was on a similar train of thought. From the day he had talked to Tsunade, he had been meaning to talk to Gaara, but for some reason he never got around to it. Why hadn't he yet? Was he subconsciously putting it off further and further? Didn't it feel like a huge weight had been lifted of his shoulders when he had explained his rather unique situation to both Tsunade and Temari? Surely Gaara would have to be no different. Heck, maybe they could even become the best of friends, well, only after the red-haired boy toned down his killing urge and his crazy fetish for blood a bit more. Maybe Naruto could even help him with it. The blonde genin smiled at the girl sitting beside him and put his hands on the table. After only uttering a single syllable, his answer was brought to a screeching halt, however, when he heard someone shouting outside, and soon after a large black-clad mass barreled down he stares to find the source of the commotion. Temari and Naruto looked at each other with their eyebrows raised as if to ask one another what was going on. Temari counted her blessings though, as she had been able to have this conversation with Naruto before her obnoxious brother, Kankuro, got downstairs and ruined the whole moment. The two were just about to go outside themselves and find out Hat was wrong until they heard Kankuro yell outside and stomp back inside, slamming the considerably large front doors as he stalked past the open kitchen door and went back up the stairs. This was soon followed by a wail from someone else. They didn't have to wait long until that person crept cautiously inside the house and peeked around the edge of the door, revealing a pretty face topped with long and sleek white hair. "Kumiko-san," Naruto exclaimed happily. "Who?" Temari asked as the girl walked shyly in the kitchen clutching a heavy bag. Kumiko, having been brought up with excellent manners, quickly bowed, causing her hair to spill in front of her eyes as she introduced herself. "My name is Mikazuki Kumiko, pleased to meet you." Looking questioningly at Naruto, and even though the girl had introduced herself, Temari was still wondering who she was and why she was here. More importantly, why was she carrying that bag? Bouncing out of his seat, the blonde boy walked quickly over to the girl standing there still clutching her heavy bag and took it from her. "Is this all? Where's the rest?" "It's still outside," was the reply. "Where is Kakashi-sensei? Why isn't he helping you?" This question caused an underlying rage to boil to the surface, and the girl quickly got past her shy demeanor that appeared when she was in front of strangers. "He brought me here to the front door and just disappeared on me," Kumiko said heatedly. "What?" Naruto yelled, outraged. "What is he doing? Is he going to read that perverted book of his again?" The white-haired refugee huffed. "It wouldn't surprise me." "Hey, what's going on?" Temari screamed angrily, because if there was one thing she didn't like, it was to be ignored. Naruto turned around and looked at her innocently. "You didn't know. Kumiko is going to live here." An uncomfortable silence followed these words as Temari stood there, open-mouthed, trying desperately to utter a response. When Kumiko started to fidget uncomfortably, the Sand Nin let loose a loud verbal barrage. "Say what? When was this decided?" Both members of Team 7 clutched their ears and winced. I'm going outside and make sure my bags don't get stolen," Kumiko said weakly and ran out of the kitchen, leaving a certain blonde boy to face the brunt of a furious Temari. Naruto backed away slowly, holding his hands in front of him to ward off any attacks that might come his way. "Temari-chan," Gaara said it was okay. "She's my new teammate. She can't live with that perverted sensei, who knows what he'd do to her." "You can't be serious. She's a quote. Temari spluttered. "A what? A girl. A pretty girl," she continued in her mind. "Oh God, she's a what?" Naruto asked, having no idea what his girlfriend was going on about. The kunoichi took a deep breath and closed her eyes. "Nothing. Never mind. She can stay," Temari said in forced calm. She couldn't be jealous, could she? Still slightly confused, Naruto moved towards her and grabbed one of her hands with his own. "I'm going to help her carry her stuff inside and I'll talk to Gaara later. It'll be fun having her around, you'll see." He grinned and followed Kumiko outside to help her with her luggage. Temari, however, was not so convinced it was going to be fun. Feeling angry and confused all at once, she grabbed the two bowls from the kitchen table and washed them. Setting the wok in the refrigerator, she wiped her hands on the apron she wore while preparing breakfast. The girl fingered one of her 4 pigtails, sighed and uncons. Seriously quoted the laziest shinobi in Konoha. This is going to be troublesome. As she woke up in her perfectly tidy bedroom, she couldn't quite understand why she felt like her heart was being squeezed so painfully. But unfortunately, the events of the day before soon hit her like a runaway freight train that bored a hole straight through her very being. She sniffed once and forced herself to stand up. Even the comfortable warmth of her futon didn't offer any solace against this kind of pain. The girl walked up to the human-length mirror that was fastened on the door of a heavy oak cabinet in the corner of her room and looked at herself. If she was perfectly honest with herself, she looked horrible, dreadful. Puffy pupil-less aquamarine eyes looked at her short navy blue hair, which was a complete and utter mess. Ugly streaks further marred her pale face. They were silent testimony of the tears that had spilled over her cheeks the day before as she had locked herself away from the rest of the world. If only the object of her complete devotion could see her now. He would be glad he hadn't picked her, she was sure of that. Naruto-kun, she whispered softly and react. Head out to touch the mirror with one of her hands. She dropped on her knees and bit her lower lip to stop it from trembling. If her father saw her like this, he would probably say that she was a disgrace to the Hyuga main family. Not fit to be the heiress. Hyuga Hinata. Disgrace to all Hyugas. Even her own little sister was better than her. She couldn't control it anymore and squeezed her eyes shut, damning herself for her own weaknesses as the tears flowed freely. Her fists shook in her lap as she tried to stop herself from being so weak, but she couldn't. She just couldn't. In her mind she remembered the fight during the Chunin exam preliminary match against Hyuga Neji, the man who told her she was nothing and should just give up. Naruto was one of the few that believed in her and shouted encouragements. When everyone else said she would never win. Stop deciding things about people. Idiot. Kick that bastard's ass, Hinata. He had shouted when Neji lectured her Abu. How it was impossible to escape from fate. Hinata, stand up for yourself. It gave her the strength to fight, to keep fighting even when it became apparent she would never win. I won't go back on my words. That is my ninja way. He even came to her before his fight with Neji. She had confessed to him that when he had cheered her on, she felt like she could change a little, that she could even like herself a little bit more. Not to be perfect, just to be a proud failure. Even when you fail, to have the strength to get up. She remembered herself saying something similar to him. Why couldn't she follow her own advice? I thought you were a plain-looking dark weirdo. But, a person like you, I really like. Even if he didn't like her the way she liked him, did that mean she just had to sit down and cry? Was it really the end of the world? Well, it certainly felt that way now, but she had to get up and keep going. This she had to believe. In the Sand siblings' household, a girl was being scrutinized severely and she didn't like it one bit. She had just returned downstairs with her new teammate, Uzumaki Naruto, and he seemed to be the only one who treated her kindly. She was certain she didn't like the guy named Konkuro as he stared at her and muttered something now and then that she couldn't quite catch, but whatever it was, it couldn't be good. What's the deal with him and those overgrown dolls of his anyway? She thought after she had seen him clean some rather human-like constructs. The sister, TEMARI, was still a wild card. She certainly seemed to hate the moment she walked into the kitchen this morning and the slightly older girl found out she was going to live with all of them. But now she only looked at her uncertainly. Well, I'll find out soon enough, I guess. Now the one person that was worse than anyone else was the youngest of the siblings. Gaara, doesn't he ever blink? She thought as she squirmed under his unrelenting cold stare. Without thinking she moved slightly away from him and bumped into Naruto, and began fiddling with her long hair. What's up, Kumiko-san? He chuckled, completely unaware of the building tension in the living room where they were currently residing. And this was one a bad thing to do, she soon realized as she saw pure malice flash across Temari's green eyes. Kumiko was about to draw all pretenses and run away until the other girl spoke to her through gritted teeth. Kumiko, why don't you and I go upstairs and make sure you get settled in? If there was one thing she didn't want, it was to be alone with a fellow kunoichi who was more than willing to rip her head off. She looked at Naruto and silently pleaded for help, but unfortunately for her he stuck true to his reputation and was, as usual, oblivious to the peril his teammate was currently in. With a few beads of sweat appearing on her forehead, Kumiko got up hesitantly and followed Temari as she stalked out of the living room and upstairs to her room. She was certain that somewhere someone was playing a mournful death march just for her. As the two girls disappeared from view, Naruto turned to Gaara. "Hey Gaara, could I talk to you for a second?" he said and looked at Kankuro, who for some reason looked particularly gleeful. Alone, Gaara stared at the blonde boy for a few moments before he averted his gaze towards his brother. "Leave." The puppet using genin glared at his younger sibling for a split second before he realized exactly who he was glaring at. Clearly discontent, he growled and got up to his feet. When he was out of earshot, Gaara refocused his attention on Naruto. "Talk," the possessed boy said simply. "Well, I wanted to talk to you before and I don't know why I've waited so long, but..." Naruto started and bent slightly forward to look at the floor from the sofa he was sitting on. "You know how you've got that demon inside of you and everything." "Shukaku. Yes, yeah." Naruto trailed off and started to stare at the dark rug with a red and gold mosaic pattern that was laid down in the living room in a clear effort to decorate it tastefully. It clashed horrible with the purple draperies which filtered the afternoon sun that shone brightly as if its sole purpose was to light up the spacious living room where the two boys held their current heavily weighted conversation. "Does the name Kyuubi ring any bells?" Gaara stayed silent for a moment before he closed his eyes. "I believe my father spoke of it once." "Really? What did he say?" Opening his eyes again, Gaara sighed almost inaudibly as he remembered the conversation he had with the late Kazekage a number of years ago. He said that it was an enormous fox that had 9 tails. In a savage rampage it nearly destroyed this village until it was sealed by one of your Hokages. My father was sorry he couldn't seal it in me as it was apparently more powerful than the demon trapped in an old kettle which they unleashed to possess me while I was still in my mother's womb. He wanted to create the ultimate weapon. Naruto's stomach contracted painfully. How could anyone be so cruel to their own child? It was this that made him almost glad he didn't have any parents. Almost. During the fight with Gaara a couple months ago, he had realized that they were almost the same. He realized he could have become like Gaara was once, a mindless killer who murdered only to prove his own existence. And to have a father like he did, it was no surprise at all he had turned out that way. How it must have hurt. The pain of all those years. The belief of you being nothing more than a mere weapon for your own father. Living a tortured existence, only to be used as a weapon. That bastard, Naruto thought, outrage clearly apparent on his face. He had to help. He had to become a friend of this boy who knew the pain of having a demon inside him. No matter the cost, he was going to make sure that Gaara knew there was more to life than just killing. Naruto had always point-blank refused to become a mere tool for the village. He was going to live his own life and make his own decisions. And he would make sure Gaara would understand how to do that too. "It was me, the 4th Hokage sealed Kyuubi inside of me." Naruto blurted out suddenly. To hell with the consequences. He wasn't going to hold this secret from Gaara any longer. Only the widening of his eyes betrayed the redhead's emotions until he managed to splutter something. What? Naruto was equally surprised. As far as he knew, hardly anything got any emotion out of Gaara. But it was to be expected. "Yeah, I've got a demon inside of me too." After somewhat recomposing himself, Gaara's thoughts immediately went back to when he had fought Naruto. Even in his demon form he hadn't been able to beat him. "So that's why you were able to beat me." Even the blonde boy could see that Gaara needed time to digest this newly revealed information and stood up. He started to walk out of the room, before he turned around. I'd like to be your friend. I know it's not much but it's all I can offer if you'll let me." He didn't get a response as the sand nin stared into space, lost in thought. Deciding he would check on Kumiko and make sure she was indeed getting settled in, his mood was ruined when he heard a familiar voice. Sarcasm almost dripping from the words. "Wow, you sure handled that well. Shut up you stupid fox." Today was definitely not a good day. He had been dragged out of bed by his mother, again. This in itself was needless to say, extremely embarrassing, not to mention troublesome. Only moments later, he had been summoned to the Hokage's office. There he had to endure an hour long of senseless banter with a woman who didn't even bother to cover herself up decently. Then he was sent on a mission which he really didn't want to do, namely to fetch an important scroll from a neighboring village. He was sure it was probably not even that important, seeing he didn't have to go to any shinobi village to get it. He was a chunin, for crying out loud. What was the use of sending him on such a troublesome mission? All in all, he was definitely ready for bed as he stood in front of his house. Sadly, the day would only get even worse. Well, he would think it would in a few moments anyway. Shikaku. Ah, there it was. He had only just turned his head sideways when he was engulfed in a mass of blonde hair, blue clothing and bandaged limbs. Ino, what the? He said, his voice muffled as he tried to disentangle himself from the girl that had literally thrown herself at him. Get off of me, woman. Shika-kun, I'm glad you're home, the girl said breathlessly, her face slightly flushed. Yeah, I'm home and now I'm going to bed if you don't mind, he said moodily and fished his keys out of one of the many pockets of his flak jacket. Ino stared at him incredulously. You're going to sleep now, but it's only 6:30. Shikamaru sighed. He definitely wasn't in the mood for this and was about to explain his reasons to her. That was, until she grabbed him by the arm and dragged him to a grassy hill that overlooked the field where the Nara clan kept their deer. She set him down forcefully and grabbed a small brown bag she had carried with her as she dropped in front of him on her knees. What's going on? The chunin started but was shushed by Ino immediately. She grabbed something out of her bag that was square shaped and wrapped in a checkered napkin and shoved it in Shikamaru's hands. He scowled at her for a moment but decided it was too troublesome to ask her what it was and instead removed the napkin, revealing a bento box. Ino nodded eagerly and smiled brightly. I made you some lunch and dropped by your house to give it to you, but your mother said you were out doing a mission, so I've been waiting to give it to you later. I suppose the food is all cold now, but that's all right, it should still taste good. Shikamaru, however, was slightly apprehensive. Ino had never made anything for him before, and he sincerely doubted if it would taste good as she said it would. He slowly opened it. The blonde girl noticed this and urged him to hurry up. Go on, there's no explosive tag in there, you know. Shikamaru, again, wasn't quite sure of her statement but finally opened it, revealing a large portion of soggy rice, mangled bits of sushi and some weird red brownish things with strange spots on them, which had apparently sprouted legs. What the hell are those? He asked as he prodded them carefully with the supplied chopsticks. To his surprise, Ino squealed in delight. They're sausage octopuses, aren't they cute? I've put faces on them and everything. Nearly face-faulting, the black-haired youth responded with a safe, So that's what those spots on them are. He thought, as he wedged one of them between the two slim pieces of wood. With her bright blue orbs, Ino trailed the path of the sausage octopus to Shikamaru's mouth. He put it past his lips and chewed quickly with his eyes closed. In one word, it tasted. Ew. Single quote. Okay, maybe that wasn't a word, but it definitely didn't taste good. Horrible, awful, unfit for human consumption. Yes, those words suited the torture his palate was experiencing perfectly. However, when he opened his dark brown eyes, he met Ino's orbs that were like chips of ice, yet sparkled with warmth. He couldn't bring himself to say this aloud. So how was it? Quote, it's pretty good, he muttered and shoved more of the food into his mouth and swallowed it quickly. Way too troublesome. Single quote. Squealing again, the blonde clapped her hands in front of her chest. Thanks, Shika-kun. It was my first attempt at preparing a bento, I'm glad you like it. Shikamaru stayed silent, but winced mentally every time he took a bite. When he looked at Ino's face, however, he found that she seemed truly happy that he thought it was pretty good, and that made him feel only worse. Finally finished, he closed the box and handed it back to Ino, who stuffed it back in her bag with the crumpled up napkin. He let out a gargantuan sigh, stretched his arms in the air and dropped himself on his back to look at the sky. Ino placed her roan bag beside her and lied down next to him. So you do this often, right? She said softly. You just lie back and stare at the clouds. They stayed silent, simply lying on their backs like that for a while as the sun dropped towards the horizon, bathing the oddly shaped autumn clouds in a golden light and painting the sky in a majestic purple and orange mix. "Hey Shika-kun," Ino finally asked. "What is it?" was the grunted reply. The blonde kunoichi looked to her side and stared at the black-haired boy. She was certain that what she had prepared had been horrible. Shikamaru ate it all and said it was pretty good. Before she lost her nerve, she dashed her head sideways to plant a quick kiss on his cheek. "Thanks." A blush stained Shikamaru's face as he looked at her in shock. He quickly looked up at the sky again though and put his hand on the spot where he had been kissed. "Yeah, passing the limit. You're not putting enough strength into it." "I'm trying. Try harder." When the rest of Konoha was having either dinner or relaxing after a hard day's work, two young genins could be seen on training field 4, performing a series of kicks that would undoubtedly leave their unfortunate victims with shattered bones and battered flesh. The boy, in a tight green jumpsuit, had removed his shirt and had it tied around his waist. He was crouched, dark eyes fixed intently on his sparring partner, his bare-chested torso with lean and supple muscles glistening with sweat from today's workout. Even if the temperature kept dropping daily, the exertion of today's sparring session heated the both of them generously. His partner, a girl with pink hair, had already discarded the black jacket she wore today and was panting heavily as she say. A glare so intense that the green-clad boy should have been able to feel it. However, the boy ignored it as he simply gazed back steadily with stoic determination. In the back of her mind she was grateful, but that was quickly shoved aside by her volatile inner self as she kept repeating two words over and over like a mantra. "Kill him, kill him, kill him." Straightening, the boy flexed his muscles, tossing his head from side to loosen the strain in his neck and shoulders, his glossy black hair with its distinctive black bowl haircut glinting as it caught the dying beams of the already setting sun. After distancing his feet and crouching again, he put one bandaged arm behind his back and beckoned the girl with the other one to invite her to attack. Again, the pink-haired girl inhaled deeply, causing her nostrils to flare, and exhaled slowly through her mouth. She closed her eyes and settled into a relaxed stance as she prepared herself for the move her male training partner had continuously drilled into her brain for the better part of the day. With the added weights it had become even more difficult to learn. Beating down the murderous part of herself, she forced herself to clear her mind and focus herself solely on this new technique. They stood like that for a few moments until the girl's bright green eyes snapped open and she twisted her body sideways. Konoha Goriki Senpuu. Leaf Herculean Wind. With a loud yell, the kunoichi jumped up and turned into a miniature whirlwind as she sent herself spinning forwards, left leg stretched as far as it would go. With as much strength as she could muster. The only thing going through her head at that particular moment was to crush the skull, and subsequently the brain, of her voluntary victim with the back of her booted heel. Acting quickly, the black-haired boy darted to the side and shifted his weight to one leg to counter the impact of the blow as he used both arms to block her kick. After the soft slap of the boy's bandaged palms hitting her flesh, the girl let out a strangled cry and hit the ground with a loud thud. "No more," she managed to gasp, chest heaving with every labored breath she took. The boy slipped on his green shirt and walked over to her. He smiled as he examined the exhausted girl with her sweaty face that had a large number of pink strands that clung stubbornly to her forehead and cheek. "That was great, Sakura-chan," he stated proudly, and she knew by the tone of his voice that he had meant every word. Things had definitely changed during the last few days. Under the threat of unimaginable torture, he had taken a harsher attitude when it came to his beloved Sakura. Inwardly though, he cried every time he said that her technique was flawed, or when she did push herself hard enough, which caused him to do it for her. But even he could see that there was something troubling her. He was sure she could have picked up this new technique a lot quicker. Her breaths slowly returning to their regular rhythm, he sprawled down next to her on the damp grass while she muttered a quick thanks for his compliment. He was about to ask her what was bothering her, when she suddenly spoke up. "Lee-kun." "Yes, Sakura-chan," he inquired. "I think I hurt someone a lot yesterday." She started and let out a remorseful sigh. Lee knew better than to interrupt her and therefore waited patiently until she continued. Do you know Hinata? Hyuga Hinata? The pink-haired Kunoichi asked. The boy's dark round eyes stared at the girl in confusion. Of course, she's the one who fought Neji in the preliminaries, right? His cousin, from the Hyuga main family. Sakura propped herself up on her elbows and looked at her feet in obvious shame. I talked to her yesterday. And she paused here to twiddle her feet nervously. I might have told her something I shouldn't have. My dear Sakura-chan, no matter what you could have told Hinata-san, my love for you is as a raging inferno that will consume anything that might stand in our way. In the back of his mind, a miniature Lee stood with fire in his eyes and a shaky fist held in the air in front of him. The mini Lee ranted on and on, proclaiming his undying devotion to his female companion, and Lee almost didn't hear Sakura continue about what was bothering her. I think almost everyone knew about her affection for Naruto. Everyone except him. But he told me he had gotten a girlfriend a few days ago. Really? Naruto-kun has a girlfriend? Lee said quickly, but it came out as choked sob. Yet another thing you have bested me in, Naruto-kun. You truly are my eternal rival. Sakura kept on talking, point blank ignoring the black-haired boy's surprise. And I thought it was Hinata. So I went to find her and asked her about it, but she isn't his girlfriend. I think she's really hurt. Lee-kun, what should I do? This was Lee's moment to shine. He jumped up and struck his favorite, good guy, pose. One hand on his hip, the other high into the air as far as it would go, and a beaming smile that glittered, even though it was dark, on his face. Do not worry, Sakura-chan. Youth power will prevail. Hinata-san will surely grow stronger and become a much-desired lady. He proclaimed and punched both of his fists into the air. Yes, Guy-sensei, be proud of me. One day I will be as wise as you. But, even if Lee was convinced that Hinata would probably get over her pain in time, at least that was what Sakura thought he meant, she wasn't too sure. From what she had seen, the only moment when Hinata had truly stood up for herself and had been strong was when Naruto had been cheering her on. If no one else could make her do that, what would happen to her? Unbeknownst to her though, Lee was already thinking about other things. Mainly if Naruto did indeed have a girlfriend, that meant he wasn't pining after Sakura anymore. And that in turn meant that the OD-looking taijutsu specialist would be the only one chasing after Sakura. He thanked Naruto for this chance and would from now on go to even greater lengths in his great quest, focused on proclaiming his undying love to the pink-haired girl and make her his. Deciding to brood more on this matter later, Lee walked over to where Sakura had dropped her jacket and handed it back to her. We've made excellent progress today, Sakura-chan. Tomorrow we will definitely perfect the technique we practiced. Sadly for him, the Kunoichi had other plans. I'm sorry, Lee-kun, but I'm going to meet up with my teammates tomorrow. We haven't gotten to know Kumiko-san properly yet, she said, and almost took pity on the sad expression on the black-haired boy's face. She had told him about the new addition her team after she had first met her, but had been too busy with her training to do anything else at the time. After they said their goodbyes and headed towards their respective homes, Sakura had only one thought on her mind. I'll find out who your girlfriend really is, Naruto, or I'll die trying. Indeed, find out she would, but not without a small amount of shock. A serene morning greeted Konoha the next day. The birds that hadn't left for warmer regions yet were chirping merrily as they scavenged for food. The pale sun was just rising to the dreary sky as the inhabitants of the villa were eating breakfast or were in the process of waking up. Of course, a mix of the two was more widely applicable. Yet for one girl, this was anything but a serene morning. Shut up already, you twit. Don't call me a twit. Why wouldn't I? If you don't like it, just go play with your dollies. They're not dolls, damn it. They're puppets. Well, you sure could have fooled me. What? Yeah, you heard me. Cooing at them like they're your stupid playmates. Is that why you cover your face in paint? Don't people notice you otherwise? Well, screw you. Go screw your puppets. Yep, Makajuki Kumiko had snapped. She had gotten a less than friendly welcome yesterday when she finally moved in, but this morning it had been even worse. She could stand the glare she got from the only other female resident of the large house, with whom she had shared a tense and uncomfortable conversation as she helped her get settled in her room. She could even deal with the creepy sta from the red-headed guy who seemed to suffer from severe sleep deprivation. But when that boy said something along the lines of having another useless brat inside the house, she got mad. Really mad. The other person who lived here sat there in the kitchen with blonde disheveled hair and wide round blue eyes as he saw the shouting match in front of him. He had never expected that his new teammate, who as far as he could tell was normally shy, would blow up like this. When his other teammate, Sakura, would proceed to beat him senseless after he had relentlessly hounded her to get her to go out with him. It was still nothing compared to this. Even his girlfriend, Temari, with her shrewd and calculating mind, sat there gaping on her seat, completely and utterly perplexed. The boy, who was being yelled at, was addressed by his red-haired brother as he steadied himself for a burning retort. "Kankuro, be silent. She is our guest. Treat her as such. If you disgrace us any further I will." He paused there for a moment, carefully considering his words. He had almost said he would kill his older brother. That wouldn't look too good. It seemed old habits died hard after all. Hurt you, Kankuro, already lost for words, was outraged that his brother would take the side of this obnoxious little brat. He puffed himself up until his face became bright red like a tomato, which could probably not have been covered up by the paint he had not smeared on his face yet. Arrgh. As he let out this thunderous roar, he stomped heavily out of the kitchen and up the stairs to lock himself up in his room and slammed his door shut in obvious protest and indignation. It was only at that time that Kumiko calmed down and took in the shocked faces of Naruto and Temari. Gaara, of course, only stared at her without a hint of emotion on his face. She didn't know what to think of him. He kept staring at her like he had nothing better to do. But apparently he was the one that held all the authority and he had allowed her to live in their house for the time being after all. Unbeknownst to her, however, there was a mix of emotions beneath that impassive mask of his. Emotions he didn't know how to deal with. Just the day before he had found out that there was someone other than him who had a demon inside of him. Actually he had already guessed that Naruto should have some extra power, but he had never expected this. On top of that, he had actually offered to become his friend. Nobody in their right mind would want to like Gaara, yet Naruto did. To be perfectly honest, he really didn't know what to do, but he did figure he would have to have another talk with the blonde genin. And if he didn't want to explain all of these alien things that Gaara felt, well, there were always limbs he could crush and rip off. As an uncomfortable silence fell, Kumiko sat down quickly and attempted to cover her blushing face with her small hands, but failed miserably. Thankfully she didn't need to bother explaining why she flew off the handle like that to the rest of the inhabitants of this house, as a loud and impatient rapping on the front door caught all of their attention. Counting her blessings, Kumiko watched Naruto bounce off his seat and run towards the front door to open it and greet the visitor. A moment later, a pink-haired GIRL walked into the kitchen after a grinning Naruto. The blonde boy clutched one hand behind his head and used his other to introduce the girl to the sand nins. "Sakura-chan, this is Temari-chan," he said, pointing towards a girl who was obviously not happy about something. "And I believe you've already met Gaara, he. Indeed she had, and her eyes widened in disbelief as she saw him. Shish. He had been vaguely aware of Gaara's presence when they brought back Sasuke, but she remembered that horrible form of his when they pursued him during the sound and sand invasion. Her nightmares from the Enon had often contained a horrible monster with pulsing purple veins and huge claws grabbing her and slowly squeezing her to death against a massive tree. "Yeah, we've met." She trailed off and refocused her attention on Kumiko. "Hello Kumiko-san, do you live here as well now?" The white-haired girl nodded her head quickly, eager for an escape from the awkward happenings scant minutes ago. "Yes, Gaara-san graciously allowed me to stay." While the two girls continued their banter, which contained no useless information whatsoever, Temari looked suspiciously at Naruto and then at Sakura. What was with this Chan business? Even if she was his teammate, he had no right to call her Sakura-chan. Almost lost in her slightly paranoid thoughts, she quickly snapped to attention as the pink-high red invader outlined the plans she had cooked up for the day. Quote. Well, I thought we could get to know each other a little better. So how about going to a training field and maybe after we've talked a little bit we can show each other some of our abilities? She explained. Yeah, Naruto yelled delightedly, never missing the chance to show off his cool and flashy moves, but I'm going to get a new one soon. Kakashi-sensei thought it up for me. In one swift motion, the kunoichi from the sand jumped up, grabbed Naruto's right arm and refused to let go. Naruto-kun, could I come along? She said in a seductive purr, which immediately caused a faint red to stain his cheeks. What the hell? Sakura thought. No way, surely that can't mean that she's his girlfriend. She shook her head as if to banish these ridiculous thoughts from her head and locked her bright green eyes on the slightly flustered male genin. Sure. I don't mind Temari-chan. I'd like to see your moves as well, he said and looked at both his female team members to confirm if it was indeed alright for her to come along. He got a curt nod from the both of them and then immediately ran up the stairs to his room to get ready. This left a red-haired boy sitting at the kitchen table, feeling slightly amused for some odd reason. Several minutes later, the party of 4 was underway. Sakura led them all towards the training field she had used almost every day with Rock Lee in a quest to become stronger. She smiled to herself. Today all that hard work was surely going to impress her teammates. Sure, she still needed a lot more training, but doubtlessly she had improved and she wouldn't have to be left behind anymore just because she wasn't able to make a difference in a fight. Her SMI quickly turned sour though as she looked behind her, seeing an unsure Kumiko walking next to Temari who still clung stubbornly to Naruto's arm. He himself was also wondering what was going on. Temari had never been clingy like this before. But he didn't mind, actually he quite frankly enjoyed himself. When they had arrived at the field after a short walk, they sat themselves on the damp grass. But it was obvious that Naruto was eager to get things started so he could show off his jutsus. He didn't know many jutsus yet, but the ones he did know were awesome, in his own opinion. Sakura's eyebrow twitched slightly in annoyance as she saw the quivering and excited form of Naruto. Why don't we all just state our likes and dislikes and our dreams for the future? Just like we did when we first got assigned as Team 7. Okay Naruto, sure, he yelled happily. Kumiko watched Naruto and was amazed by his happy and carefree attitude. He sure is interesting. The white-haired girl GHT and let a small smile appear on her face. What the hell is she playing at? The other girl of the group thought. Temari was not happy about having her boyfriend surrounded by these girls, not happy at all. What was more, she had no idea what she was going to say. She disliked a lot of things, but didn't like much. Well, there was one thing though, of course. But what about her dream? Did she even have one? Her musing was interrupted however, when Sakura spoke up. I'll go first, she said and furrowed her eyebrows slightly as she tried to transform her thoughts into words carefully. Well, I like training and I like flowers a lot. I hate it when people tell me I'm weak and my dream is to become a great kunoichi who can fend for herself. She nodded as if to confirm this to herself. ND pointed at Naruto who now resembled a quivering object on an obvious sugar high. You go next, Naruto. Okay, he shouted and then grinned rather stupidly. Well, I like Temari-chan, he. And I like ramen. Yeah, I hate it when people hurt Temari-chan and I hate it when people underestimate me. He blushed slightly, and gave the girl sitting next to him a slight squeeze as he rapped one arm around her shoulders and used the other to scratch the back of his head. My dream is to become Hokage, so I can protect my friends and the people I love. Kumiko thought it was extremely cute of Naruto to say all this, but Temari was struck speechless. Naruto-kun, she began but became silent once more as she saw those sapphire orbs gaze adoringly at her. Sakura was silent for a whole different reason. Yet inside her mind a flurry of questions and shouts of amazements followed each other in rapid succession. No way in hell, Temari. From what she had seen, the Sand Nin had been nothing but cruel, yet here she was, obviously all lovey-dovey with her male teammate. Could things get any weirder? Slightly in a daze, she motioned for Kumiko to start. I like training as well. Especially with a katana. I also like to go shopping. She admitted quickly and blushed furiously, but found none of them making any comments about it, so she continued. I dislike living with Kakashi-sensei. My dream is to restore my clan's honor. She got a few surprised responses from this. They had heard she was a refugee from the Hidden Moon village. But had this something to do with the apparent dishonor of her clan? What happened to your clan, Kumiko-san? Sakura asked curiously. The white-haired Kunoichi's expression was filled with sorrow. I'd rather not talk about that right now. Naruto nodded in understanding. Possibly more than Temari and Sakura would. He understood the need to keep a secret. Therefore, in an effort to lift the mood slightly, he prodded the girl next to him to start and tell the rest a bit about herself. Temari looked hesitant for a minute but decided that she might as well share with the others. She cleared her throat and began. I dislike a lot of things, mainly weak opponents who aren't worth my effort and certain people who need to stay away from other people. She said this through gritted teeth, and Kumiko and Sakura could literally feel the burning glare she sent their way. It only now became apparent to the pink-haired girl why she would do that, and Sakura nearly logged head out loud at the very thought that she'd try and steal away Naruto, but any thoughts like that were quickly banished by the slight feeling of dread that the Sand Nin inspired. I like cooking and I like. She trailed off and nudged Naruto slightly, which caused him to chuckle in slight embarrassment. And I don't have a dream I'd like to follow. Wide blue eyes turned to her in shock. Why not? Naruto asked bluntly. Temari sighed and shook her head sadly. I just don't. I never really had one. Not that I really had the chance. She added as an afterthought. The girl with her 4 spiky pigtails quickly got annoyed though at the looks of pity she received from the 2 other girls and was about to tell them where to shove them until Naruto spoke up loudly. That's all right, Temari-chan. We'll find your dream eventually. Nearly face-faulting, the girl didn't know whether to strangle Naruto for embarrassing her or to kiss him senseless for being so caring and cute. He chose a mild form of the latter and gave him a lingering kiss on the cheek, which sent Sakura into a state of shock once more. Thank you, Naruto-kun. The genin merely chuckled and flashed his trademark foxy grin at her. Now come on, I want you to see my cool moves. He jumped up and ran a short distance from the 3 girls. A slight pang of sadness ran through Kumiko's body as she watched him. His cheerful attitude reminded her so much of her. Well, best not to think of that now. Truth be told, she was quite curious to see the abilities of her teammates and pondered whether she really show them her own true abilities as well. But it had already cost her so much, there was no way she could show it to them. Not yet. No, the fewer people that knew of it, the better. 3 sets of eyes swiveled towards the boy as he took a focused stance and formed a middle index cross with his hands. After inhaling deeply, he bellowed, Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. With a loud poof, a small cloud of smoke appeared next to Naruto. After it dispersed, another identical Naruto stood grinning broadly at the 3 girls. Both of them spoke in unison. Cool huh, absent-mindedly run. A hand through her flyaway strands of hair that refused to be held together by her braid. Sakura gazed at Naruto in perplexed confusion and grudging admiration. It was amazing how he was able to use this technique so successfully every time. Temari, of course, was proud. She mainly judged people by their strength, and she had heard of this move and knew it was supposed to be hard to pull off. But she expected nothing less of the teenager that had defeated her little brother. Kumiko, however, let her jaw drop to the ground. Kage Bunshin, I isn't that Junin level. She stuttered. Her village, although reclusive, was knowledgeable of the techniques from other villages. As far as she knew, no one in her entire village had been able to use this technique. Even though certain techniques were exclusive to certain villages, that didn't stop the able shinobis of the Hidden Moon to try and master them. The blonde boy nodded proudly. This technique was his favorite by far. Nothing else. He could give him the satisfaction of beating an enemy to a pulp with a small army of his own tangible clones. Okay, are you guys ready for the other technique I'm going to show you? Without waiting for any response, his features were suddenly tense and strained in obvious concentration as he grabbed his right arm by the wrist with his left hand, his fingers tightly clutched around it. Never telling anyone, Naruto had secretly trained this technique. running off whenever he had time to spare. I can do this. Now I'm beginning to understand how this technique was done. The boy's pressure on his own wrist increased. As his left hand remained locked in position, instead of using it to perform the usual rapid stabbing motion which brought to life the spinning energized ball of whirling chakra. Blue eyes narrowed in strained concentration, teeth gritting almost painfully. His muscles complained as they always did when he took on so much strain. But his body tingled with triumph. The pinnacle of the sense of achievement. Because he had now slowly perfected the technique of this chakra bullet, achieving the one-handed focus of chakra that had first defined it. This pure, raw energy in his palm was the true essence of the technique he had acquired so long ago. And now it was perfected. To the silent and awed audience, it seemed that at first nothing seemed to happen. Until suddenly the girls felt the beginnings of a slight breeze, a light gust of swirling wind that gradually increased in intensity. A mischievous smile seemed to tug at Naruto's lips as he stared at his calloused palm. But it was quickly squashed as he clenched his jaws even harder in concentration. Ghostly white tendrils of pure energy randomly spinning around his hand were suddenly focused, forming a growing ball that hovered on a single point just above his palm. The whiteness started to pulsate into a quickening beat as it began to form into a round object, and after a few more seconds Naruto yelled out loudly in triumph. Rasengan. The girl's eyes widened, even Sakura, who had seen it before. All of them, although unknowingly, agreed on one point: it was beautiful. A perfect glowing white orb, that shone brightly as if to banish all darkness away, was situated into Naruto's open hand as he held it in front of him. His intense blue gaze flickered slightly to his astounded, silent audience, and then alighted on the energized ball spinning and hovering on his palm. Sure, he had finally managed to conjure the Rasengan with one hand, and he was quite proud of that fact. But what he really wanted was to show the raw power of the technique. After all, its goal was hardly to shut his enemies up by impressing them with its prettiness. Dismissing his clone, the blue eyes scanned the many trees that lined the training field, finally focusing on one with a particularly thick trunk. The odd spectators watched the boy crouch slightly, beads of sweat lining his forehead. Briefly, he met their gaze and grinned toothily before he became an orange streak, swiftly leaping towards his target, his right arm poised in a backwards thrust, like a coiled spring. 3 pairs of widened eyes could just stare in stunned silence as they watched him hurtle towards the stout tree, a glowing, pulsing orb creating a blinding blur before him. It had all happened so quickly that suddenly the thrust of his arm into the tree trunk seemed to happen with the slowest of motions. Numbly the girls watched, but nothing prepared them for what happened next. A blinding flash as his arm met the tree. Then, a moment later, the tree exploded. A huge shockwave ripped through the tree with a horrendous force, knocking the wind out of the 3 girls as it washed over them, carrying an endless spray of large chunks of wood and splinters out the back of the now shattered tree trunk. Flinging their arms protectively across their faces, the girls saw the debris litter the ground. As the orb of swirling chakra dissipated, it left a stunned silence in its wake. That is until, with a loud groan, the tree's years of peaceful existence were extinguished as it fell down to the earth, unable to support its weight any longer due to the gaping hole replacing what was once its gnarled trunk. Holy, Sakura began. Crap, Kumiko finished. Was Temari's silent response, her jaw nearly dropping to the ground. Maybe I went a little overboard, Naruto mused as he took in the gaping forms of the girls. As he slowly walked back towards the rest of them, Kumiko was beginning to feel slightly intimidated by the level of skill of her new teammate. If the other one, Sakura, was also this talented, could she even begin to compare? She had her own techniques. But compared against that Rasengan technique, Sakura's eyes bulged though when she heard Naruto calmly explain that he had a summon too. He said he couldn't show it to them, because he still wasn't really able to control his chakra properly yet. For all he knew, he might summon a small frog or the boss of all frogs, the incredibly large Gamabunta. She looked around to see if anyone else was surprised. And indeed they were, but for a whole other reason. Their minds were still trying to take in the destructive power of the Rasengan. Unbeknownst to Sakura, she was the only one of the group who didn't have a summon. Shaking herself out of a slight daze, Sakura stood up and told the rest she would go next. she still wore her weights so that they would provide some protection against what she was about to do. She explained to the three others that she didn't know much ninjutsu or genjutsu yet, aside from basic techniques like Henj no Jutsu, Bunshin no Jutsu and Kawarimi no Jutsu, but was training vigorously with Rock Lee to improve her skills in taijutsu. It served two purposes. One was to increase her normal stamina and strength, and the other benefit would be an increased chakra reserve which she desperately needed. Now was the time to prove to herself and others that her training had indeed started to pay off. She picked out a tree that luckily didn't get picked for Naruto's display of his destructive technique and took a relaxed pose as she focused all her strength in her legs and midriff, rotating her upper body sideways as far as it would go. Taking a deep breath, she held it fast in her lungs and bent her knees slightly to prepare herself for the jump. After a short moment, she let the gulp of air go in a loud cry, Konoha Goriki Senpu. Jumping forwards and spinning like a savage tornado, she struck the trunk with her heel, making the whole tree shudder and groan in protest. All the leaves that had not fallen yet floated down to the ground gently. A stark contrast with the horrible 10-inch dent marring the tree trunk. The rest began to wonder if this was it, the extent of Sakura's new strength. But any and all murmurs of puzzlement were quickly silenced by sharp snaps and cracking noises as the tree keeled over ever so slowly. Aided mercilessly by gravity, it dropped towards the earth with a loud echoing boom. "Whoa, she's like Obaa-chan," was Naruto's immediate thought as he saw the violent scene in front of him. Although still working hard, the pink-haired girl did indeed show the affinity for, as Jiraiya put it, the freaky strength that Tsunade possessed. Coupled with Sakura's random maniacal outbursts, in other words when her inner self would gain control, she could very well become a force to be reckoned with. That thought alone made Naruto proud yet also shudder. That's it. Sakura, still panting slightly, turned slowly at the sneering, scoffing tone, at the bluntness of the words. Temari met her glaring eyes defiantly. "That's all you can do." The Sand Nin wasn't impressed at all. Nearly everyone could fell a tree in one strike. Sakura felt her body tensing as a vein started to throb dangerously on her forehead. "What did you say?" she screeched, her fury rising. "You heard me. That's basic kiddie stuff. You're nothing without some good ninjutsu or genjutsu." Temari shouted, still in her jeering tone, and rose menacingly to her feet, her fists clenched. Even though Sakura knew that Temari was right, she couldn't let that comment slide. There was someone who was a gray shinobi regardless if he could use ninjutsu and genjutsu or not. "Shut up. That doesn't matter at all, you stupid bitch. Why you little..." The Sand Nin was fuming. How dare that little pink weed insult her like that? Growling ominously, and not once taking her intent gaze from the furious pink-haired girl, she crouched briefly to retrieve her fan, which she had set down beside her when they had arrived at the training grounds. Seeing that Temari was quite ready to beat the snot out of his teammate, Naruto gulped and his first reaction was to duck for cover and hope that this would blow over. But he knew that he had to defuse the volatile situation somehow. Eyes darting between the two young women, he rose to one knee, wondering whether he should jump in between them and possibly sacrifice his life in the process. However, Kumiko, who had remained silent up until this point, beat him to the punch. As Temari and Sakura were stalking towards one another, sparks flying between their hateful glares, they were stopped from getting any closer by a long and sharp metal object. Silently and with amazing speed, Kumiko had grabbed her beautifully ornamented katana that no one had previously noticed and used it to slice through the air vertically between the two glowering girls. Its pure ivory handle held securely and confidently by the white-haired girl who gave the other two a look that said plainly, "Don't go any further, you won't like the consequences." That went nearly unnoticed by Temari and Sakura however, as they gazed at the beauty of the blade. Aside from the precious ivory, the handle was also studded with a perfectly cut diamond and 3 round pearls inlaid in both sides. But even with the beautiful jewels, it still radiated simplicity. The sunlight that filtered through the clouds was reflected off the perfectly curved blade, its stunning silvery beauty indicating its rare and precious metal lineage. All of this almost made it seem like the katana was housing an unearthly spirit. No, a divine spirit. Even moments after it cut through the air, it still hummed and vibrated as if it was energy itself, as if otherworldly beings were whispering their untold secrets. Kumiko saw the two back off, although reluctantly, and stated calmly that she would go next. With a fluid motion she returned the blade to its snow-white lacquered sheath that, in comparison to the katana itself, looked very plain indeed. After this quick and unplanned exhibition that clearly showed Kumiko's skill with the sword, the two other girls seated themselves next to Naruto, who was quite eager to see what else his new teammate could do. She shook her head slightly, making her sleek white hair to ripple gently in the wind, and reached into a pocket of her light blue jacket to grab a simple black ribbon. She placed it in her mouth to hold it and used both her hands to bundle her hair in a simple yet effective ponytail. She couldn't allow her pure white strands to get in her way, needing to maintain all of her attention on the movements she was going to perform. Facing the other three, she distanced her feet and relaxed into a comfortable position, knees slightly bent and hands resting on the sheath and handle of her sword. She closed her silver eyes to stare into the hidden space only she could enter through the darkness of the back of her eyelids. The gateway to her inner peace, the place she visited in her mind when she needed to focus completely. Once, it was a widely used meditation technique by her now extinct clan. As if, timing her movements to her own inner melody, accompanied by the thumping rhythm of her heartbeat, she slowly extracted the blade and brought it overhead, simultaneously lifting her left foot to the side of her right knee. She stood motionless like that for a moment, making her seem like a perfect picture of serenity. Returning her foot to the soil and shifting her weight to her right side, she sliced the sharp edge through the air, ever so delicately balancing the blade between her slender thumb and index finger. With practiced perfection she gracefully swirled around, arms extended as her hands gripped the ivory handle confidently, striking down imaginary foes. She weaved the katana into complex motions only few could perform, shifting her weight slightly to maintain her balance. To continue her beautiful and lethal dance, leaping backwards she flipped in the air, immediately bringing the katana in for a sideways sweep. She made a final twirl and blindly let her blade return to its sheath. After what seemed like a blissful eternity, Kumiko opened her eyes, her silvery depths still in trance-like state as she stared into nothingness. The three that had been watching this awesome spectacle felt themselves release a breath they had been holding. Naruto and Sakura tried to find words to compliment Kumiko, but only found themselves able to let out a stream of nonsensical babbling. Temari was uncharacteristically silent. She desperately wanted to form a venomous comment about the things the white-haired girl had displayed, but the sheer beauty of it all was still fresh on her mind. Coming to her senses, Kumiko let her unsure gaze stray over to the three others, and always feeling self-conscious about herself, she took their gaping forms the wrong way. Did I do something wrong? She asked them hesitantly. No. Naruto and Sakura immediately yelled. Gee, that was beautiful. The pink-haired Kunoichi breathed. Yeah, Naruto affirmed, nodding brightly several times. Kumiko beamed at them and scurried over to where they sat on the grass. Did they really like it? It wasn't just for show though, she thought as she tried hard not to feel too pleased about her performance. HMMPH, it was all right. Temari scoffed and folded her arms in front of her chest. After seeing Naruto praising his teammate so readily, she felt anger boiling inside of her, and with it came the focus to speak clearly again. Stupid little, who the hell does she think she is anyway? Oi, Kumiko-san, I can't wait till you teach me how to use that cool sword. Sakura and Temari exclaimed. Naruto looked at the both of them with an eyebrow raised. I told you, Kakashi-sensei developed this technique for me. Kumiko is going to help me how to use it properly, he said as it was the most obvious thing in the world. I am? Kumiko asked with a puzzled expression. Nobody told me anything, but Kakashi-sensei said. He did, huh? The white-haired girl interrupted hotly. When I get my hands on him, he should be glad I don't live with him anymore. Yeah, why don't you live with him anymore anyway? Sakura piped up, curious as ever. Kumiko let out a remorseful sigh and fidgeted slightly with her feet. He's a pervert, that's why. Squinting at his new teammate, Naruto wanted to find out exactly what Kakashi had done. If his sensei had done something terrible, and no doubt Sakura would agree, he would pummel the living daylights out of him. Well, what did he do anyway? Temari snorted impatiently. She really wanted to get out of here. She wanted to separate her boyfriend from those people as quick as possible. Obviously it would be pretty hard with Kumiko living together with them and everything, but she could try, couldn't she? Sakura raised a delicate eyebrow at the tone the Sand Nin used, but chose to ignore it. We know he reads those dirty books of his, but he didn't. You know, come on to you or anything, did he? She asked, mortified at the very thought. Naruto let out a strangled gasp as the weight of this question hit him. He didn't. No. The white-haired girl shouted quickly and blushed furiously. No, of course not. I'm only 13, what the hell are you thinking? God, this village breeds the stupidest people, doesn't it? Temari scoffed. She had thought that Sakura was a smart girl, but that she would actually think that her teacher, who was probably in his late 20s, would try and seduce a teenage refugee from a foreign village. Silvery eyes still wide with shock and slight embarrassment. Kumiko spilled the proverbial beans. No, he didn't, she affirmed, wanting to leave no doubt whatsoever that Hitaki Kakashi would go after very young members of the fairer sex. Well, after a few days since I came here, I was taking a shower early in the morning. Two gasps and a snort interrupted the girl slightly before she continued. I was showering and he, accidentally, stepped into the bathroom and saw me completely naked. She admitted in a horrified voice. The girl knew that Kakashi hadn't meant to walk in on her like that, evidently. The silver-haired Junin was not used to the sounds of someone in his house early in the morning. And still in a sleepy daze, he had stupidly stumbled into the bathroom where it was coming from. As fate would have it, Kakashi did indeed not do that on purpose. But he had a hard time explaining that on that particular moment, as Kumiko recalled not without a shudder. She had completely and utterly lost it, and her normal calm reserve had broken down into fits of hysteria, and no doubt the man's eardrums must have been literally ripped apart, with the staggering level of decibels from her raging and furious high-pitched screams. Following this revelation, Sakura's and Naruto's eyes gained a steely glint. Within spoken words, they promised nothing short than excruciating tort, Ure and other horrible punishments that would be exacted on their unfortunate Junin sensei. Temari shook her head in disbelief. Absolute, utter morons. She stood up abruptly and without hesitation. No way in hell would she spend any more time with these two girls. What made her even angrier though, was that Naruto was also showing signs of being as stupid as his teammates. Without any further ado, she grabbed one of his arms and yanked him to his feet, her fingers tightening in a vice-like grip around his arm, refusing to let it go. We're going, she stated simply and looked sternly at the other girls, as if daring them to protest. The other two girls got the hint though, be it slightly angrily, but didn't complain as they saw the girl with her four spiky pigtails drag a confused Naruto with her as they remained at the field for some much-needed girl talk. Or to talk about ways to get back at Kakashi, they weren't really sure yet. Halfway across the village, a certain silver-haired Junin sneezed and got a slight feeling of impending doom which he couldn't quite explain. Moments later, the couple stopped in the middle of a deserted narrow street as Naruto tried to pry his right arm free from the forceful grip of his girlfriend. What's wrong? Why did we leave? He asked, rotating and massaging his numb arm, trying to get the blood to flow through it once more. Temari let her emerald orbs wander around freely, trying desperately to look at anything except in those gorgeous sapphire eyes of his. I can't tell him, he'll probably hate me for being so stupidly jealous. She thought mournfully. Getting slightly worried, Naruto placed his hands on her slim shoulders, squeezing them gently. Temari-chan, what's wrong? You can tell me. Nothing's wrong, Naruto-kun. It's really nothing, she told him and let out a sigh, tightening her hands into fists and all the while damning herself for her cowardice. The blonde boy pursed his lips and retracted his hands, using them to finger the head protector that had been tied around his neck. Well, okay, you don't have to tell me. She felt as if a 10-ton sledgehammer had hit her in the stomach. It seemed he'd hate her after all. Regardless if she had told him about her childish jealousy. Until he ruined the moment completely with an incredibly stupid comment. But I really wanted to see your techniques and everything. He whined. Oh, Naruto-kun. She groaned as she nearly face-faulted. Yes, he was a stupid boy, but he was her stupid boy. Temari was relieved and for once happy for his stupidity. It seemed she could get away with her jealousy for a little while longer. She quickly slipped her arms around his neck and grinned at him as she placed her forehead against his, receiving a broad grin in return as they gazed lovingly into each other's eyes. You're so weird sometimes, you know that, right? I try, he chuckled. Good, she said simply before she swiftly closed the distance between them and placed her soft lips on his. She moaned softly and lifted her left leg as they continued to kiss for a few moments longer, completely forgetting the happenings of the world around them. They never did notice the girl watching them, her bright blue eyes sparkling much like a cat that had cornered a mouse, preparing to toy with it mercilessly before it gobbled it up. Ha ha, looks like I've got the scoop of the century. The girl thought gleefully and cackled madly as she disappeared into the shadows, leaving the oblivious young couple to their own devices. This is going to be very fun indeed. Single quote. Laying the foundation. Part 2. What took you guys so long? Was the loud berating greeting the 5 genins received as they finally stepped in the office where the 5th Hokage resided. After going past several guards who didn't seem too pleased to see them all there. Hey Oba-chan. Naruto grinned and waved his hand cheerily at Tsunade. The 3 Sand siblings and Kumiko, however, had more respect for the woman and bowed politely. Tsunade's narrowed her eyes dangerously, trying to ignore the vein that had started to throb on her forehead. Don't. Hey Oba-chan, me kiddo. Your other teammate has been waiting with me for over half an hour now. She said angrily and pointed at Sakura, who stood slack-jawed and ogling at the disrespect Naruto had shown. Go easy on them, Tsunade-hime. A deep baritone voice suddenly rumbled from behind Naruto. I'm sure they have a valid excuse. Ero-sensei, Naruto exclaimed as he spun around to see who had spoken. His eyes alighted on a tall figure leaning comfortably against the wall, arms crossed over his chest. What are you doing here? The figure scowled immediately. My name is Jiraiya, you brat, he said and glared at the blonde boy before his expression softened. I'm glad to see you too, Naruto. Hey. Naruto grinned and placed his hands behind his head and relaxed in a casual stance. But what are you doing here? Pervy Sennin, he asked again suspiciously as he stared at Jiraiya with only one half-opened eye. Straight to business, Naruto. The white-haired man thought. A small smile curving the corner of his lips as he scrutinized the blonde genin. He sure has changed, I at least expected a bit of bragging. Well, Naruto inquired impatiently, ignoring the various stares he received from everyone else in the room. That, he started, and smiled broadly, is no business of yours. Everyone who was listening with rapt attention, very nearly face-faulted at his words before they heard Naruto snort. Yeah, fine, whatever, Naruto said, too used to the fact that Jiraiya never shared a lot with him when it came to the things he did in his own time, and shifted closer to Temari, who was watching all this with a bemused expression. Oh ho, who are you? Jiraiya suddenly yelled as he took notice of Temari and Kumiko with rather lecherous eyes and rubbed his hands together excitedly. My, aren't you a couple of pretty girls? What am I? Chopped liver. Inner Sakura screeched inside Sakura's head, drowning out any and all disgust at the words that the pink-haired girl was feeling at the chauvinistic comment. It seemed the tall white-haired man was the only one who didn't feel the deadly vibrations emanating from the trembling females in the room. As he still stared at Temari and Kumiko in a rather perverse fashion. Kankuro didn't know what to do. On the one hand, he liked seeing Kumiko getting all riled up like this, but on the other, he really didn't like this old geezer hitting so obviously on his sister. It seemed that Naruto didn't either, if the teeth gnashing and rapid clenching and unclenching of his fists were any indication. Forming plans on how to deal with the current situation, he jumped when a calm, deep voice broke evenly through the tense and crackling atmosphere. What do you want from us? Gaara asked, tolling the horrible beating the large Sennin was undoubtedly going to receive from all the females in the room. Lowering herself back in her chair after standing up moments ago with the intention of beating the stuffing out of her old teammate, Tsunade spoke up in forced calm after a small cough. Oh, right, well, I called the 6 of you here, because I have some news for you. And paused for a moment, fidgeting with the papers on her desk, trying to find the proper words for what she was going to say next. "What news, Hokage-sama?" Sakura asked politely. Jiraiya turned slightly, meeting the worried golden brown orbs and raising a white eyebrow, nodding slightly. Tsunade nodded in return and took in a deep breath to steady herself. "I'm going to send the 6 of you on a mission." There was a momentary stunned silence. "Before what?" Sakura cried out, balling her hands into fists. "But we haven't had much time to get used to one another yet." "Be silent, girl," Tsunade snapped. "A week from now," she began but was interrupted at the sight of a quivering Naruto, his head lowered, hands also balled into fists. She blinked, wondering what was wrong with Naruto. What the hell? The occupants of the room all turned to the blonde boy when they suddenly staggered backwards under the sheer force of his excited outburst. "A mission, yes," he yelled triumphantly, pumping his fists high into the air and whooping around the room, all the while ignoring the popping eyes and twitching eyebrows. "What kind of mission is it? B rank? A rank? S rank? Shut up!" Jiraiya roared. D ineffectively silenced Naruto by whacking him hard on the head with a fist. "Ow, you old pervert, what did you do that for?" He whined and rubbed the sore spot on his head. "Aw man, that's gonna leave a large bump, you bastard. What did you say to me?" The white-haired Sennin yelled, square-jawed, glaring daggers at the blonde boy with round eyes who returned it just as quickly. "You heard me, bastard." "Ahem." Tsunade coughed, reducing the glaring session to a pouting match as they stood back to back with their arms crossed angrily in front of their chests. She gave them a final glare, torn between irritation and amusement. Even though this was certainly amusing to watch, business had to be attended to. "As I was saying," she began, refocusing everyone's attention to herself. "A week from now, the 6 of you will have a mission. It will be B rank, bordering on A rank, so this will be no simple task. Seeing that Baki didn't come with you 3, she said, motioning towards the Sand siblings who nodded in return. Only Hatake Kakashi will join the 6 of you. I won't lie to you, this will be a difficult mission. I advise all of you to train hard this week." She trailed off and stared at Naruto. "Naruto-kun, Kakashi and Kumiko will help you while Kumiko will also try and improve herself." Tsunade continued, and then focused her gaze on Sakura who was chewing her bot. Tom lip as if she was fighting some internal struggle. "Sakura, I've heard that you've been training with Rock Lee, correct?" The pink-haired Kunoichi nodded her affirmative and stuck her chin slightly upwards proudly. Tsunade smiled. "Well, I've also arranged for someone to help you. I have no doubt you'll learn the new jutsu she's going to teach you quickly. Her name is Shizune, she has been my companion for many years and she is very capable." "Yes, Hokage-sama," Sakura said and bowed, just barely able to hide her excitement. Training with Rock Lee was all well and good, but she was curious about what this new jutsu could be. Her mind still reeling over the fact that she was going to have to do a mission so quickly after moving into this village, Kumiko asked the only question she could think of. "Excuse me, Hokage-sama, but..." Tsunade held up her hand to silence her and then spoke up softly. "Don't worry, Kumiko. Even when I say it's difficult, I have faith in the abilities of each and every one of you. I know that you might be a bit apprehensive about this since you have just arrived at this village, but I trust you." When she received a small smile and nod from the former Hidden Moon Kunoichi, Tsunade continued, "Now, Kakashi will have all the details and will brief you when the appropriate time arrives." When she looked around and asked if anyone had any further questions, no one spoke up and she dismissed them, warning them to start training immediately. After seeing Naruto clumsily grasp Temari's hand to walk out of the office together after the rest of the group had left, she chuckled softly. "Looks like you finally found someone just for you, Naruto-kun," she thought happily until Jiraiya walked up to her and squeezed her shoulder with one of his very large calloused hands. His dark eyes crinkled as the Sennin smiled broadly. "He's one lucky kid, isn't he, Tsunade? A little strange that he's with that girl though." "Yeah, but you still I didn't tell them everything," he rumbled and removed his hand to step towards one of the windows to stare out over the village. "I couldn't. They have to find it out for themselves." She sighed and placed her forehead in her hands wearily. "I know," Jiraiya said and closed his eyes in deep thought. But Naruto is special, and you know why. I just hope he doesn't get hurt. You told me earlier that you wanted to teach him something. Care to tell me what it is and why you didn't tell that to him immediately? Tsunade asked as she turned to her fellow legendary ninja, who unlike her, didn't hide his aging body with genjutsu. Nope, it's a secret. Let's just say that it's something I haven't been able to pull off myself, and I'm hoping he will. He answered with a grin. Ah, come on, tell me. She whined. As Jiraiya very well knew, Tsunade really hated it when people kept things from her, and he took great pleasure in torturing her like this. Nope, he said again and winked cheekily. You'll just have to wait. A few seconds later, the guards outside turned to each other with their eyebrows raised. They were sure they heard a man screaming something along the lines of, "Get away from me, you old bat." But for some reason they decided it was better not to interfere with the strange happenings that took place behind the door they were stationed in front of. After having said goodbye to Sakura, Kankuro and Gaara, Naruto and Temari hung back outside of the Hokage Tower along with Kumiko, who quite honestly, didn't know what to do and kept staring at the ground with a slight blush on her cheeks as Naruto and Temari tried to part ways so they could start training. I'll go back home as soon as I can, okay? Naruto murmured, his voice muffled as her soft lips kept pressing softly, adoringly on his own. Her fingers playfully clutching his, refusing to let go. The boy chuckled, blushing, and grinned when he finally pushed the girl slightly away from him by the shoulders. Imari looked at him with a flushed expression and smiled. Okay. Sapphire eyes locked into emerald ones lovingly until Temari pursed her lips as if to stop from giggling, and swiftly spun around, breaking the moment. And ran away quickly to catch up to her brothers, waving a quick goodbye at the two that she left behind. Something strange caught at her heart as she watched the slender figure of the boy waving cheerily back. His golden hair glowing as brightly as the light in those summer sky eyes. Oh, what's wrong with me, she mused. She really didn't know why Naruto affected her so strongly. But inside she knew that she loved this beautiful, new and wonderful lightness within her. Eager blue eyes watched her disappear, and the boy started slightly at a little giggle beside him. You really like her, don't you? Kumiko asked teasingly, snapping Naruto out of his happy daze. The blonde boy grinned foxily and stuck his hands in the pockets of his khakis nonchalantly. Yep, she's great. A companionable silence fell on the two of them as Naruto just kept on grinning happily at nothing in particular, and Kumiko sat down, folding her hands in her lap and glanced around at the people that walked past them. So she started hesitantly. When is Kakashi-sensei meeting us, Naruto-san? The young genin was about to reply that he quite honestly had no idea, until a cloud of smoke erupted in between them, making Naruto jump back in surprise and Kumiko squeak loudly. Yo! A cheery voice greeted them. Clutching his heart with his left hand, Naruto pointed at the dispersing smoke with his right accusingly. Arg! Don't scare us like that, Kakashi-sensei. The silver-haired Junin chuckled and rubbed his neck while waving his other hand in front of him apologetically. Sorry, Naruto, Kumiko. Brushing off the dirt and dust from her black pants and light blue jacket, Kumiko glared at her sensei. You're going to pay, she proclaimed angrily, and something in the tone of her voice did indeed warn the Junin that she wasn't kidding. Kakashi chuckled again, though rather warily. So, are you ready for some training? At the mention of training, Naruto forgot everything that had happened and jumped wildly into the air. Yeah, let's go, and immediately ran off, leaving Kumiko and Kakashi to look at each other for a moment before they followed him swiftly. Running after what seemed a mile, Naruto had finally stopped and they found themselves at the field where Team 7 had gotten together the day before. Not wasting any time, Kakashi quickly clawed his hands together and turned to Kumiko. Kumiko, would you please train on your own for a little while? I need to talk to Naruto for a moment, he said and motioned towards the blonde boy who was already kicking and punching imaginary foes, the thought of creating a few cage buncheons, so he could spar against those instead, never occurring to him. Okay, Kakashi-sensei. Kumiko nodded, resting her hand on the sheath of her katana and walking away to create a fair distance between the two of them and her so she wouldn't accidentally hurt either of them. Oi! Naruto! The Junin yelled, waving his right arm to catch the blonde boy's attention. Stopping mid-kick, Naruto craned his neck to the person yelling his name, overbalanced and fell on his backside. He got up quickly, muttering several curses under his breath and made his way over to his sensei. Sometimes I wonder if his stupidity is an act, Kakashi mused with a mental face fault. Okay Naruto. He began cheerfully and clapped a hand on one of the boy's shoulders. Did you bring the scroll I gave you for your birthday? Patting his jacket down frantically, Naruto fished out a scroll when he felt a large bump in one of the many pockets of his black jacket. And presented it to Kakashi. Okay, now for the tricky part, the Junin said tentatively, one hand reaching up to rub the back of his head, as if wondering how to phrase this. Have you talked to Kyuubi? Blue eyes blinked up at him, a mixture of fear and determination flashing across those sapphire orbs. Yeah, I have. Kakashi saw the slightest shift in those eyes. As if something was stirring deep within, he saw the furrow of concentration appearing on the boy's features, indicating that his focus had shifted, that it was now directed at an unseen essence inside him. In an unreachable place, unreachable for everyone except him. Frowning as he saw the blue eyes slowly slide closed, Kakashi's only visible eye narrowed in serious contemplation. Amazing. He thought in awe. Hey, fur ball, you still there? Was the mental question Naruto shot out through the inky darkness that had settled in the back of his mind, allowing no other thoughts to penetrate his focus. As his subconscious reached the enclosed domain of the terrifying chakra, the boy felt the radiating waves of the ancient frustration, the fury of an immense power contained within the smallest of vessels. A low, rumbling snarl answered his call. Yeah, of course I'm still here, you stupid human. If I could have left I would have done so a long time ago. Kyuubi growled, furious that his vessel dared to treat him like this. The fury swirled again as he felt the belittling scorn, the mocking laugh of the boy. Shut up would ya? It's time to make good on that promise you made. But even Naruto, clinging to his boisterous facade, shifted uneasily as he heard that chilling rumbling laugh again, the way it bounced and echoed around the walls of the cage which held the most terrifying monster known to man. Is it that time already? The demon fox chuckled throatily. All right then, are you ready? Despite his resolve to get stronger, Naruto was feeling slightly apprehensive. Ready for what? For this. All the boy was conscious of was the sadistic growl, and then a single heartbeat went by, allowing Naruto the time to wonder what Kyuubi meant by that. Before. Something was rising. Something was coming up at tremendous speed from a place deep within, swifter, and even deadlier than the eruption of a volcano. This was. His eyes closed, his lips opened. A silent scream. The scream reverberated around and around his mind, reaching all the dark hidden shadows of his consciousness, even places which he had never been aware of before. Colors. Flashes of colors. Streaks of lightning found targets around every part of his soul. It terrified him more than anything had done before. This can't be. Pain. Never felt anything like this before. This can't be. Quote. Naruto fell on his back, trashing his legs around wildly and clawing at his stomach. It was pain beyond belief. Beyond imagining. It felt like someone had carved his belly open and was shoving red-hot pokers inside it. The sensation spread in a swirling motion, arms, legs, face. Every single nerve ending screamed in agony, the screams rising to a feverish pitch which Naruto's voice could not hope to match. His brain felt like it was exploding and dribbling out of his ears and nostrils. No torture could ever match this level of pain. And then it suddenly stopped. While Naruto's screams resounded through the clearing, the Junin had sprung to his side in an instant. Ripping off his head protector and inspecting Naruto's small frame with his now revealed eye. The Sharingan glowing red and spinning like crazy, absorbing the information which was now revealed to him. What he saw would remain with him for life. Glowing and pulsing brightly than any star. A nova of red chakra was centered in Naruto's stomach. Kakashi-sensei, what is wrong with? A voice suddenly yelled behind the Junin as Kumiko had made her way back and noticed Naruto's screaming. Her eyes widened in horror, her voice caught in her throat. Oh my god, what's wrong with him? She managed in a strangled whisper. Kakashi wanted to answer, but he wasn't exactly sure himself either. But both of them were silenced immediately when Naruto screamed again. Naruto wanted to end it all. This was just too much pain to bear. Anything to get rid of the pain. Maybe poking himself in the eyes and driving his fingers through to his brain would be a good idea. Yeah, that sounded really good at the moment to him. But even before he could reach for his eyes, an otherworldly growl resounded through his mind, calming him slightly. Hang on, kid. Don't quit on me now, it's almost over. It was about then that Naruto's screams reached a sickening and feverish pitch. Kumiko was terrified. She wanted to help the boy as he lay on the floor, twitching and flailing madly, his fingers clawing, raking across his face, his body. She had no idea what was going on. As she made to dart forwards, a deep voice stopped her. Kumiko, stay back. An arm was flung across her chest, barring her path. She glanced upwards fearfully at the tall Junin. At the silent terror in his eyes, the contained horror and a quiet understanding. His jaw tense, Kakashi's thoughts whirled frantically, his heart ached for his student. He desperately wanted to do something. But he knew that it wasn't his position to help. Whatever he's going through, it's something beyond our reach, beyond any help we can give, and I also know that it's vitally important, Naruto. And yet, though he tried to assure himself by that thought, nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. The Junin almost felt his heart pause in its furious, thundering momentarily at the sight that greeted him. The boy's slender body was twisted in a painfully tense, inflexible position, spread-eagled. Violent trembling seemed to start and stop, stop. His mouth was twisted in a silent scream, all color drained completely from his face. His features were caught in a fierce grip, a snapping tension that seemed to tear him apart. Something was happening, something so terrible, so awful they couldn't even begin to. But the living nightmare took on a more frightening reality all of a sudden. The boy's eyes snapped open. But it wasn't he beautiful bright blue that they'd been used to for so long. Because suddenly they realized that what they were seeing was that shifting of something deep within him. A giant menace had come to life. What had previously been invisible had taken form, had taken substance. And it had chosen those eyes, it had chosen those innocent glowing orbs to make its demonic, fiendish presence known. Bako. Say no longer were they the bright summer skies. They were intense, deep, the color of the raw, savage, most primal emotion known to mankind. The color of anger, of raging and rising fury. Red. Suddenly that ancient fury seemed to flicker from that place somewhere deep within. Just like the light of a candle is brightest before it fades, so this evil glow was as well. The Junin and the girl could only watch in horror, numbly. Helplessly as the painful tension within the boy's body slowly calmed. But they never saw the return of his blue orbs. Though the blood red had faded, it had left something behind. As the flickering died away, his eyes closed in terrible weariness and his body turned slack. All Naruto remembered after the torment he had gone through, was his seemingly weak, HT-less body being picked up by a tall man with silver hair, and though the man's mouth was hidden behind a mask, the blonde boy was sure he was shouting something at him. Smiling faintly, Naruto let out a weary sigh and let the darkness take him. Kid, Kyuubi growled, pacing impatiently behind the towering gate within Naruto's psyche as he looked down at the slumped form of Naruto, sleeping peacefully just out of reach. Single quote. Kid, the demon repeated, an angry tone becoming apparent when the blonde boy didn't answer the first time. MMMF, was the slurred reply. Wake up already, you pink flesh bag. Kyuubi roared, about ready to disembowel the blonde youth. Naruto was jolted awake and jumped up, immediately reaching for his eyes to rub them with the back of his hands. What is it? He yelled, annoyed due to being woken up so abruptly. It's time that you wake up. Kyuubi trailed off and wrapped its 9 tails around its giant body. Remember the promise you made. I will collect your debt in the near future. Now, open your eyes. The giant fox finished and sent out a burst of chakra. Automatically flinging his arms in front of himself protectively, Naruto was surprised that the chakra, which had taken the form of a thick red haze, didn't feel threatening in the slightest for some odd reason, unlike the first time Kyuubi had done so. But Naruto had no time to ponder about this though, as the almost tangible haze swirled around him like a vortex, and forced him out of this inner prison. He felt like he was floating, being carried on a gentle breeze until a King feeling settled in the pit of his stomach, and with the sudden realization he knew he was back in control of his body, and lying on something soft, and something was lying on top of him. Stirring only slightly, he cracked his eyelids open only to scrunch them closed immediately as a blast of sunshine hit him squarely in the eyes. Now slightly more carefully, he reopened his eyelids and squinted, taking in his surroundings. Why am I back in my room? He mused as he saw the various posters and scrolls adorning the opposite wall and noticed his various pieces of clothing strewn across his only chair, desk and of course, on the floor. When Naruto tried to shift his body to sit upright, he again noticed that something was lying on top of him. He peered down and immediately a goofy grin framed his features. Temari. The sparse sunlight that beamed through his only window made her sandy-colored hair shine. Her 4 normally neatly tied pigtails were slightly undone, no doubt that had occurred during her sleep. But Naruto thought it only made her seem even more beautiful. Her almond-shaped emerald eyes were closed and every now and again her nose would scrunch up cutely, almost making Naruto chuckle. But as she lay there next to him on top of his blanket, her head on his chest and left arm wrapped around his midsection, he couldn't allow himself to make any sound at all. He really didn't want to disturb this angelic vision. He was sure it would be nothing short of blasphemy. He let himself sigh contently, causing Temari's head to bob up and down slightly before closing his eyes again. This was just perfect. I know you're awake, Naruto-kun. Damn. Naruto opened his eyes regretfully, damning himself for waking her up. He really wanted to lie here just a little bit longer. He let his eyes shift downwards yet again to look at Temari, only to find her staring up at him with a worried expression. How did you know? He started but was interrupted by why the girl who was still holding him tightly. That you were awake, she finished for him and received a nod from Naruto in confirmation. Temari mock scowled and batted him on his left arm with her free hand, still refusing to let him go. Well, I am a kunoichi, you know. Naruto grinned. Yep, and a damn good one too. I'm glad you think so, otherwise I'd have to prove it to you. Temari grinned at him wickedly. No thanks, I've seen you in the Chunin exams, remember? And no doubt you've become even better. I really don't want to fight against you, Temari-chan. He said and freed his arms from beneath his blanket to wrap them around Temari's shoulders. A comfortable silence fell as Temari put her head on his chest again and tightened her arms around him. After what seemed like a few minutes, she spoke up again. I was really worried, you know. About what? Naruto asked. About yesterday. Temari's head snapped back up and looked at him with open mouth. Yesterday? She asked in return. That wasn't yesterday. It wasn't. The blonde boy inquired, confusion clearly written on his face. But your sensei, Kakashi, brought you home a week ago, Naruto-kun. A week? Naruto exclaimed and seated himself upright, throwing off Temari in the process, who tried hard not to glare at him. But what about the mission? And what about? Any further ramblings were stopped over when Temari placed a finger gently on Naruto's lips. She shifted herself into a sitting position next to the blonde boy and explained. You were asleep for a whole week, the rest of us have been training when we could, but when Kakashi went to Hokage-sama, she postponed the mission for another week. I've tried training but, she trailed off and blushed slightly. I've spent more time here and actually allowing myself to train though. Really? Naruto asked, feeling like something inside him was filling him with warmth he couldn't deny, and stared lovingly into Temari's emerald eyes. It looked as if she was about to nod. But to his horror, her eyes widened and recoiled. She clutched her sweater tightly with one hand and used the other to point at his face. And Naruto-kun, what the? He mentally questioned himself, wondering if he had done something wrong, and if he had, what it was exactly. The hand pointing at his face wavering slightly, Temari took in a sharp breath. Naruto-kun, why your eyes? Immediately Naruto's hands went up to his face, as if to grope what his girlfriend was pointing at. What's wrong with my eyes? He asked. They feel fine. Naruto wanted to ask if she was making fun of him. But that idea quickly got squashed when he saw that the shock on the kunoichi's face was genuine. When she got up and quickly and dashed out of his room, he called out to her. Afraid that she would leave him for something he really didn't know anything about, but he needn't have bothered as she returned just as quickly, carrying a small plain mirror in her hands. Walking uncertainly towards Naruto, She handed it to him and sat down on the other side of his futon, now eyeing him with disbelief. What the hell is going on? Naruto wondered as he warily lifted the mirror to eye level and see what had upset Temari so much. When he saw what she had seen, he nearly dropped the mirror in shock. Red, sapphire, ruby, his eyes, once a pure sky blue, were now FLE. CKED with a crimson red, creating an unnerving mosaic of sapphire and ruby. But what really scared him the most was that after peering what seemed like an eternity into his own eyes, he could have sworn that his pupils turned into slits. Just like they did when he drew on Kyuubi's power during a fight. But when he blinked, they were round like they were before. Shaking his head, he decided that he must have been imagining things. He stared wordlessly at Temari for a few moments, who stared back, her shock apparently replaced by something else. And now he definitely knew he was imagining things. Because it actually looked like she was amazed by his new eyes. Staring at his reflection once again, he had to admit though, that the intricate pattern of the blue and red was kind of cool, but he wasn't too sure. After all, it wasn't every day that you woke up and you found yourself with a new set of eyes. His musings were interrupted however when Temari placed both of her hands on his cheeks. Dropping the mirror in his lap, he gazed into the emerald eyes of the girl that held his heart. It's him, isn't it? She asked. Naruto didn't need to ask whom she meant by him, and nodded dumbly. Yeah, she nodded in return and swiftly moved forwards, covering his lips with her own, her fingers softly and lightly brushing over his eyelids. The blonde boy wondered for a moment what she was doing, until he felt a gentle caress over his eyes. Startled, he opened them to see her drawing back, a gentle tinge on her cheeks, her emerald eyes shining, and something warm glowing within them. I don't care if you've got new eyes, I love you all the same. She said, and gave him that special smile, reserved just for him. Lost for words, Naruto darted forward, kissed her and then grabbed her in a fierce embrace. Unwilling to let go, thank you, he said thickly and nuzzled her slender neck. Gently he felt her soft hands pressing his shoulders back, and then felt the softness of his pillows underneath him. His eyes locked with her sparkling emerald green, watching her as she lay down beside him. The time to face the world would come soon, but for the moment, neither wanted anything more than the other's company. A few hours later, when the two youths were finally able to pry themselves away from each other, Naruto figured it was time to face the proverbial music. Before they left though, he had almost attempted to hide his new eyes through genjutsu, but Temari had stopped him by simply placing a hand on his arm and shaking her head. Still, he was afraid. He knew that someday he was going to have to tell his friends about Kyuubi, but between the choices of sooner or later, he would rather choose the latter option. The transformation of his eyes just made it seem like the eventual confession would come too soon, and he didn't know if he would be ready for it. Taking a deep breath and receiving a comforting squeeze from Temari, they left the house Toge. Theron went to look for his sensei and Kumiko. No sense in wasting any time, he thought. While others might have been bedridden for months on end after the excruciating pain Naruto had experienced, he managed to be up and about after a mere week. In fact, he felt absolutely great. He knew that Kyuubi had granted him power, but he felt like he could take on the world, and then some. As they walked towards the training field where the incident had happened a week ago, Naruto couldn't help but notice one thing. Particularly when he kept stealing glances at the girl next to him, who returned them just as quickly with a warm smile. The glances kept following each other more rapidly though when it suddenly hit them. They were equally tall. Just a week before, Temari had to bend her head slightly downwards to kiss the blonde genin, but now, the kunoichi had heard of growth spurts, but this was ridiculous. Naruto-kun, you've become taller, she said, stating the very obvious. Scratching his head, Naruto could only nod his head in response. Why yeah, he managed to utter before another thing hit him. If he had grown like this, that meant, woohoo, he shouted happily, startling Temari. I'm not short anymore. Temari laughed merrily. Naruto really did see the best in the changes he went through. Yes Naruto-kun, you're not short anymore. Naruto halted his outburst momentarily and turned to the girl walking next to him. He nodded vigorously while grinning broadly all the while. "Oh man, this is so cool," he said. "Just wait until Kakashi-sensei sees me, he'll flip." Her eyes crinkling, Temari just smiled and listened to the things Naruto was going to be able to do with his new height and the people he was going to impress. In no time at all, however, they reached the training field and heard the several shouts being sent back and forth until suddenly, they saw a gigantic ball of lightning being shot towards one of the figures using the field. "What's that?" Naruto gasped in awe, his euphoria about his newly attained height completely forgotten. As Temari watched the ball of crackling silvery white energy bounce thrice, scorching the grass every time it hit the ground, hit the figure. She gulped. "I don't know," she whispered as the figure was blasted backwards with a loud grunt and impacted the ground with a painful thud. A second later though, the figure disappeared in cloud of smoke, revealing a very heavily charred log instead. "Kawarimi," Naruto breathed. That was Kakashi-sensei, so that means that Kumiko-san used that technique. Temari swore. "Shit, she's a lightning user. My wind techniques are nearly useless against those." Even though she knew that she would probably never have to fight Kumiko, Temari couldn't help but be annoyed. Her jealousy wouldn't accept a potential rival who could steal her boyfriend from her, to be stronger than her. No matter what the cost, she would be stronger. She was snapped out of her reverie however, when Naruto spoke up again. "Come on, let's go," he said, and dragged Temari with him towards Kumiko, who was currently scanning her surroundings, obviously trying to find out where her sensei had gone. The white-haired girl quickly spotted them though, and returned her blade, which she was still holding warily in her hands as if to fend off any incoming attacks, to her sheath with a sharp snap. "Naruto-san, Temari-san," she called out, waving energetically at them with one hand and brushing several rebellious strands of her hair out of her eyes with the other. "Kakashi-sensei, he's back." A small explosion and a cloud of lazy gray smoke announced the arrival of her teacher. "Yo," he said simply, staring at the boy with a lazy eye, then turned to Kumiko, who was now standing next to him. "Kumiko, what was that technique?" "Yeah, it was awesome," Naruto interjected eagerly. Kumiko had the grace to blush after hearing the praise and explained. "It's Kyuden no Jutsu, ball lightning. It is, a technique from my clan." "Cool," the blonde genin exclaimed and threw his hands forward to grasp Kumiko's delicate hands. "Can you teach me that technique?" he pleaded, jutting out his lower lip and stared at her with watery eyes. Seeing and sensing an almost palpable aura of killer intent surround Temari as she watched her boyfriend fraternize with her so freely, Kumiko quickly retracted her hands and stared at the ground. "I'm afraid I can't, Naruto-san. It's a technique developed by my clan. It would be wrong to teach it to other people." Looking put out for only a moment, Naruto quickly recovered and nodded in understanding. He grinned and placed an arm around Temari's shoulders instead. "It's okay, Kumiko-san." "Naruto," Kakashi suddenly said, his only visibly eye turned deathly serious. "What's happened to you? Huh, what do you?" Naruto began until realization on what his sensei meant suddenly dawned on him. "Oh this," he said, pointing at his eyes, and hovering an outstretched hand between the top of his and Temari's head. Only receiving a nod of acknowledgement and a raised eyebrow from his teammate, he continued. "I don't know, I think it has something to do with you-know-what in the you-know-where," he said, displaying an uncommon amount of intelligence in keeping his secret from the white-haired girl, and shot a knowing look at the tall Junin. This comment only caused Kumiko's other eyebrow to shoot up as well, now both in danger of disappearing into her hairline completely. What are they talking about? She wondered, though now taking a closer look at Naruto. She did indeed see there was something different about him. He seemed taller and, his eyes, they were almost hypnotic. Shaking her head to clear her mind of these thoughts, she glanced sideways at her sensei and noticed him staring his now only male student squarely in the eyes. "Naruto, have there been any other side effects?" Kakashi asked gravely, not even the slightest hint of humor apparent in his voice. Tapping his chin for a few moments and then looking at Temari as if to confirm some unspoken words, he shook his head. "No, I feel fine. Actually, I feel great." He grinned and stuck his hands into the air to support his words. Kakashi looked at him doubtfully, but dropped the subject nonetheless. They had work to do, and even if Naruto had undergone some significant change. The Hokage had given him specific orders not to waste any time and start his training immediately. When questioned about her orders, she had simply raised a hand to silence him and then summarily dismissed him. Faced with no other option other than to obey her, Kakashi had walked silently out of her office and started training with his new student until Naruto was able to join them again. Yesterday, however, he had checked on Sakura and was pleased to see her working so hard to become a better kunoichi. Maybe Sasuke's betrayal did have one good effect after all. So, when are we starting? Naruto asked suddenly, craning his head every which way, already scouting the area and obviously eager to get started. Temari smiled when she looked at him but narrowed her eyes dangerously as she shifted her gaze at Kumiko. Yes, when are you going to start again? Clearing his throat uneasily and watching Kumiko take up a sudden interest in her feat, Kakashi nodded sagely. We'll begin immediately. Naruto, do you still remember the hand seals? Yeah, of course I do. Okay, that's the easy part, Kakashi said and then held up one finger to capture everyone's attention. Now when you focus your chakra, envision it gathering in your hand, make it take the shape that you want and hold it there. Oh, like the Rasengan, right? Naruto nodded. Yes, partly. With the Rasengan you just need to hold the spherical shape, I'm not saying it isn't difficult to do. Kakashi said quickly, seeing the look of outrage form on his student's face. This is just different. It's a lower-level technique but it still requires a massive amount of concentration. It might just blow up in your face if you don't succeed. Oh, Naruto added quietly and frowned. Taking this moment to address the two other girls, Kakashi turned to them with a small smile hidden behind his mask. Temari, if you wouldn't mind, would you spar with Kumiko a little bit while I help Naruto perform this technique? Snapping her head upwards in shock and surprise, Kumiko squeaked when she saw the wolfish grin and blazing emerald eyes directed her way. It would be my pleasure. Oh see. Rap, Kumiko thought and followed the other girl soundlessly as she stalked away from the other two. There was no doubt in her mind that Temari really wanted to fight her, but her only concern was, whoa. Old she forget that this would be just a sparring session. Man, I'm so screwed. Now, Naruto, let's give it a go, shall we? Kakashi suggested and closed his only visible eye in a happy crinkle. Ah geez, Ino, why drag me into all of this? Shikamaru whined as his arm was yet in another vice-like grip from said girl. Ino turned her head impatiently and glared at him. Shikamaru could have sworn he heard her growl. Because, and I told you, call me Ino-chan. She hissed, twisting his arm slightly to punctuate her point. Because, what the hell kind of answer is that? Shikamaru questioned in his mind, trying hard not to wince from the pain the girl, who had stuck to him like glue for a whole week now, had caused him. I still don't see why you want to spy on them. Twisting his arm even further, Ino smirked when Shikamaru dropped to his knees with a grunt, grabbing his shoulder in an effort to not let it get dislocated. It's not spying, Shika-kun, she said in an overly sweet voice, which was lost on the black-haired youth as he motioned frantically that Ino should let him go. When she did, but only after a few more seconds, he stood up and scowled while rubbing the spot where she had gripped him so ferociously. He really wanted to rant and rave about the way she was treating him. How could she just be terribly sweet to him one minute and then turn into an evil witch the next? But like many things, Shikamaru decided that it was too troublesome and asked her another question instead. If it's not spying, then what is it? We're just going to see how they are doing, she explained with a sigh. From the bushes, Shikamaru added. Yes, she confirmed with a quick nod. Now you're getting it. Looking up at the sky, Shikamaru really wished he was one of the sea Louds now and could get away from the blonde girl's mad scheming. But alas, that wish was shattered, trampled and then spit on several times when Ino grabbed his arm again and dragged him off to their original objective, Naruto and Temari. Yes, Naruto and Temari. Ever since Ino had found out about them, she had been plotting like crazy and had been ferreting around for information, though she was careful not to let anyone else know. Well, aside from Shikamaru, of course. Due to some sadistic twist of fate, he had been ambushed a week ago and had been forced into helping Ino. Which he definitely didn't want to do. Why me? Was the question that rang through his mind lately, more often than he cared for. We're almost there, Ino suddenly said excitedly and tugged on Shikamaru's arm a little harder. Resigning himself to his mission, because after all, it would be too troublesome if he tried to resist since he wouldn't be able to win against Ino, he switched off his mind. He didn't know how long they had been walking, but suddenly he found himself bumping against the back of the girl that had been manhandling him for the past few hours. "Hey, what are you doing?" he demanded, rubbing his now painful nose before his attention was drawn to something else. He did not even notice Ino's mouth hanging half open and her hand raised to point at somewhere in front of them. With a loud scream, Kumiko found herself being blown backwards into a massive tree by another heavy gust of wind. This sparring session was going the wrong way fast. No, it had already gone wrong. As she had feared, her opponent had taken it too far. She was bleeding and her new training attire was only hanging together on little scraps of cloth and loose threads. That outfit cost me a lot of money too, she thought angrily. Even though her body was feeling sore and not even doubting that tomorrow she would be a colorful collection of scabs, bruises and cuts, Kumiko didn't want to give up. As preposterous that Temari wanted to hurt her like this. Being jealous was one thing, but this was really going too far. When she saw Temari readying her fully opened fan again, the white-haired coon Oichi scrambled to her feet and hid behind the tree, muttering a silent prayer for it being there so she could shelter. 1, 2, 3. Ninpu. Dai Kamedachi. Cyclone Blade. There it was. Ipping her head and pinning her knees to her chest as tightly as she could, she braced for the impact of the technique the murderous Sand Nin was sending her way. A sudden sharp howling alerted her to the incoming attack and made Kumiko quiver as she tried to make herself even smaller. Loud cracks and snaps were heard as the aerial blades tried to cut through the thick trunk of the tree but only managed to remove several large branches from the now leafless crown instead. Wind along with several chunks of dirt whipped around the trunk, gashing her cheeks and causing her dirt and woodchip-infested hair to flutter wildly forwards. Several thuds all around her notified her of the impact the branches had made, and the girl cracked one eye carefully open, scanning her surroundings, trying to see if Temari might have actually swerved around in an arc to attack her from another angle. Not seeing anything threatening though, she breathed a sigh of relief and stood up, not even bothering to pat the dirt from her ruined clothes. Her shoulders pressed against the sturdy tree trunk, Kumiko's intent silvery eyes peered cautiously around the trunk. She blinked in surprise, then scowled slightly when she saw Temari's slender figure a short distance away, one hand resting lightly on her hip, the fingers of her other hand curled around her folded-up fan. But the thing that pissed Kumiko off the most was that triumphant, sneering smirk on Temari's face. Who was she trying to impress? Kumiko thought angrily, seething to herself. Stupid psychotic bitch. Come on, Kumiko-chan. Temari called out mockingly, intentionally belittling Kumiko. Don't tell me you're giving up already. Gritting her teeth, the white-haired girl stepped away from the now ravaged tree. Of course I'm not, Temari-chan. She shouted back, returning the painfully obvious insult as she gripped her beautifully ornamented katana tightly. Temari narrowed her eyes to barely visible slits and gripped her fan tighter. Her arm tensing, then a swift flick of the wrist, and the giant fan had spread to the San no Hoshi third star. Oh well, you had your time to give up, she growled. Raising the blade in front of her, Kumiko's eyes narrowed, a little tense smile touching her lips. Bring it on. Her features straining in obvious concentration, Temari jerked her fan backwards to gather enough momentum as she unleashed one of her most powerful attacks. She smirked as she saw her opponent leap forwards, bringing the katana above her head with both of her hands. It's of no use, you're still too far away to stop it, she thought. Ninpu. She began and watched Kumiko jump upwards, her clothes fluttering behind her as her body tried to defy gravity. Die. Temari continued and followed the white-haired girl with her eyes, her legs shifting to compensate for the changing angle her attack had to take. Kamedachi. She roared, unleashing the full fury of her attack only to have her eyes widen in horror as Kumiko unleashed her own. Time seemed to slow down for Kumiko as she bent backwards slightly, calling on enough energy to pierce to ferocious razor-sharp blades of wind being sent her way, which were eager to let more of her blood flow today. But she wouldn't allow it. With a graceful arc, she brought the blade overhead again and let loose her attack. Shinken no Jutsu. Divine Sword. A sudden crack seemed to split the air and emerald eyes blinked in confusion, then widened even further. From out of nowhere, purple lightning gathered in the sharp piece metal. Static Elector. Eye City suddenly permeated through the air around the two girls, raising the hairs on their heads and on the back of their necks. The lightning pulsed and crackled, gathering all along the blade, until Kumiko had the tip of her sword pointed at the Sand Nin, a swift flick of her wrists and the lightning hurtled towards its target. Ripping through the air, the purple lightning disrupted the wind rents and rendered them harmless as they were before, but it didn't stop. With a booming bang it impacted the fan TEMARI was so proud of, simply causing the sturdy black lacquered wood and carefully painted cloth to burn up and explode. The force of the impact and resulting explosion sent TEMARI flying much like Kumiko earlier, twisting strangely beautifully through the air as she spun around Ika rag doll. Only one thought entered TEMARI's mind before she hit the ground with a painful, loud resounding crash and all turned to black. Goddamn lightning user. Laying the foundation. Part 3. Only just 3 years old. A little girl grinned happily as she played on the shaggy rug in the living room with the sparse toys her house provided. Taking a sideways glance though, she saw her little brother approaching and pouted immediately. She turned to him and quickly hid the wooden doll she had gotten on her birthday a few months ago. For some strange reason, her little brother just wouldn't stop trying to get his hands on it. Obviously she wasn't going to let that happen, it was hers and hers alone. No, Konkuro, this is my dolly. Go play with your own toys. She yelled in a bossy tone, already knowing what he was after. Dowie, Dowie. Her brother giggled, a small amount of drool dribbling from his lower lip as he stretched his chubby arms out to his sister. Temari, Dowie, it's TEMARI, the girl said, infuriated that her smaller brother couldn't even pronounce her name properly. No, you can't have it. Dowie, Konkuro protested as he tried to stand up, immediately falling backwards on his backside. No, TEMARI shouted and stood up, holding the pale wooden doll above her head. Her brother's eyes widened at the now insurmountable task of getting the object he so greatly desired. And did the only thing he was able to do. He cried, cringing as the ear-splitting bawling hit her eardrums mercilessly. TEMARI ran quickly out of the living room, her 4 pigtails of which she was so terribly proud of, bobbing up and down as she left her crying brother behind. When she reached the hallway and stood at the bottom of the stairs that led to the first floor, she let out a breath of relief. Her emerald eyes glanced about, looking for another spot where she could play but couldn't find anything. She took a step in the direction of the kitchen, but cringed when she heard someone shout her name from upstairs. TEMARI-chan. TEMARI's brain seemed to be able to produce only one thought. Did her mother hear Konkuro crying and was she going to be punished? Shaking her head from side to side fiercely, she dismissed that thought. No, of course she wasn't going to be punished. Her mother loved her more than anything, which was something the little girl had always been eager to exploit. But she couldn't help but squeak and hide behind the large plant that stood next to the front door as she heard her mother call out to her again, a tone of urgency apparent in her voice. Flabbergasted, struck speechless, that pretty much summed up the reaction of Ino and Shikamaru as they stood, mouths agape, watching the scene in front of them. Naruto. Ino started feebly, pointing half-heartedly at the boy standing a fair distance from the two. Shikamaru nodded dumbly, pretty much understanding what she was trying to say. Naruto, the #1 hyperactive brat of Konoha, was holding nothing other than a 10-foot-long, massive red blade in his hands. Well, attempting to hold it anyway. A silver-haired man, who previously went unnoticed by Ino and Shikamaru, scratched the back of his head and stared in disbelief at Naruto. Naruto, he chuckled nervously, I think you might have overdone it a little. Features straining in obvious exertion and concentration. Naruto turned to the Junin as he wobbled back and forth, desperately trying to keep the blade balanced so it wouldn't tip over and possibly kill the two of them at the same time. I know that, damn it, he grunted, blinking the perspiration out of his eyes that dripped from under his spiky bangs, which were no longer held up by his forehead protector. His chakra control was already terrible, but, Kakashi thought, cutting his musings short to focus his attention on the two speechless spectators. "Hey Ino, Shikamaru, what are you two doing here?" he asked casually, his tone oddly amiable in the presence of something so unearthly and strange. After a moment's pause, the Junin saw that he wasn't going to get a reaction while his student was juggling the humongous blade in his hands. Kakashi walked up behind him and unceremoniously gave him a shove between the shoulder blades. His concentration shattered. Naruto gave a cry of surprise and fell flat on his face. Fearing the blade was going to chop him in half, he quickly rolled on his back, closed his eyes and flung his arms in front of him protectively. But when after a few seconds he was still intact, he cracked open one eye ever so slightly and saw that the sword had simply disappeared. Kakashi chuckled again. "Oni no Kiba will dissipate if it leaves your hands, Naruto." "Oh, the blonde bee." Oi deadpanned and picked himself up from the ground, patting himself down in a vain effort to clean himself. Naruto might not have been very focused on personal hygiene and his appearance in the past. But ever since Temari had cornered him and threatened to separate his limbs from his body when he came home after training for a few hours, covered in grass stains, dirt and another whole assortment of icky things, he did indeed pay more attention to how he and his clothes looked. And even though it was a pain in the ass to have to keep watching out for his cleanliness, Naruto just had to look at Temari once. And then he knew it was just worth it. Smiling behind his mask, Kakashi shouted at Ino and Shikamaru again. "Hey, you two, come here." Snapping out of their awe-inspired daze, Ino swallowed hard and Shikamaru scowled. But both of them walked towards Naruto and his sensei, albeit slightly reluctantly. When they approached the two who, just moments before, were obviously practicing a very dangerous technique, Ino's bright blue eyes sparkled with wonder and let out a high-pitched squeal, producing a sigh of annoyance from her black-haired companion. Pointedly ignoring him, however, Ino conjured up her most dazzling smile and stared at Naruto. "What was that?" she asked, bubbling with barely contained excitement. Her inquisitive, though slightly, well maybe not slightly nosy De would never live this down if she didn't find out what the teammate of her rival was doing a scant minute ago. Taken aback by her energetic question, Naruto blinked and started stuttering, unable to form a proper response. He was saved, however, from having to answer, when Kakashi clapped a hand on his left shoulder and answered for him. "I'm afraid we can't tell you, Ino." Unperturbed, Ino decided to take another approach. The deadly puppy dog eyes technique, which she had perfected so many years ago and was now irresistible to all the men and boys of Konoha. She looked up at the Junin, cherry blue eyes pleading and a trembling lower lip pouting cutely as she clasped her delicate hands in front of her chest. "Please." Giving no other indication of being affected by this lethal technique, other than the slight narrowing of his only visible gray eye and a twitch in the corner of his lips, which was hidden by his mask at any rate, Kakashi shook his head. "No, I'm sorry." Ino was scandalized. Someone had actually defied the puppy dog eyes. She turned to Naruto, who had recovered from her first reaction, and tried it on him as well, but was also denied when he shook his blonde head. But while Ino was trying to liberate the answer she so desperately craved, Shikamaru stayed silent. From the first moment he approached Kakashi and Naruto and saw them up close, he couldn't help but feel there was something odd going on here. Shikamaru narrowed his eyes and inspected Kakashi. He didn't find anything wrong with him. He still hid his face from the general public, and as the silver-haired man stood there nonchalantly with his hands in the pockets of his black slacks, Shikamaru guessed that the Junin was probably still lazier than him, like he always had been. Focusing his gaze on Naruto, Shikamaru immediately did a double take. Blinking as if to convince himself his vision wasn't impaired in any way, the Chunin noticed straight away that Naruto was impossibly taller. Shikamaru was sure that only a few weeks ago, Naruto had been shorter than himself and now he was easily an inch or more taller. But that wasn't what surprised him the most. When he stared into Naruto's eyes, he noticed they were altered. Naruto's once blue eyes were flecked with bits of its original color but were now also a deep red. The overall effect was bizarre to Shikamaru, to say the least. Naruto, who was looking at Ino, noticed Shikamaru staring at him and quickly averted his eyes, staring at the ground and hoping that the Chunin wouldn't say anything. The last thing he wanted was tea. Oh, make a scene out of all this and preferably keep as many people as he could in the dark about his current condition. Ino's ranting fading to an irritating buzz in his ears, Shikamaru picked up on Naruto's desire to stay quiet about his recent changes, and kept his mouth shut. Not that he would have told anyone about it anyway, it would have taken him way too much energy to do so, and Shikamaru wouldn't really want to be a person to be accused of being a gossip. No, he would leave that title to Ino. Regardless, Naruto was spared from having to give any lengthy and possibly uncomfortable explanations in case Ino ever decided to notice the changes he had undergone. Quite suddenly, a loud and booming explosion echoed in the distance. It was followed just a few seconds later by a dissipating, rolling shockwave that carried clumps of dirt, leaves and tiny rocks that peppered the four-leaf nins as they turned their heads as one to stare at the source of the commotion in shock. Naruto's eyes widened. "Temari-chan," he gasped, and ran off in the direction of the explosion, leaving Kakashi to follow a split second later and Ino and Shikamaru wondering what the hell was going on before they too followed the distressed genin. Temari fearfully crept up the stairs of her home, holding her breath every time the rickety wood would creak under her light weight. She really wanted to be a great kunoichi like her mother, the great Tanagawa Suzura, and being noticed before she even arrived on the landing just wouldn't do. When Temari was finally at the top of the stairs, she peeked just over the last step and looked around carefully with her big emerald eyes. She knew that her mother was probably not going to yell at her. Her mother never yelled. Well, hardly ever anyway. The only person she would yell at was her father, but that only started about when her mother became pregnant again. Though just a small child, Temari was clever enough to realize that was because her father had changed. He had become the cage when she was born and would always play with her, but when her mother had told everyone that she was going to get a new brother or sister, he had turned so cold. So frightening. Now was not the time to think about that though. Temari had a mission, and that mission was Temari-chan. Eep! Temari cried out, nearly toppling over as her mother opened one of the doors on the first floor, holding her swollen belly containing her yet unborn child, then focused her eyes on her daughter directly. Though looking surprised for only a moment, Suzura's eyes curved in a happy crinkle as she beamed at Temari, who, quite honestly, was scared out of her wits at her mother's sudden appearance. Laughing softly, Suzura scooped her now sobbing daughter in her arms and held her tightly as the small girl's teary sobs died down to muffled sniffs into her mother's shoulder as she latched onto her intricate lily-patterned kimono with her small fists. There, Temari-chan," her mother cooed, patting and rubbing the little girl's back affectionately. "Don't cry." After a few more moments Temari leaned back, still held in her mother's arms and rubbed her teary eyes with the back of her hands and locked the now slightly puffy orbs with her mother's. She liked her mother's eyes, more because they were as brilliantly green as her own than anything. For some reason it made her feel special and strong just like her mother. "Am I in trouble?" Temari asked meekly as she sniffed once more, unable to stop herself. "Because I made Kankuro cry." Suzura grinned. "You made Kankuro-kun cry, huh?" she inquired. "Let me guess, he wanted to play with your doll again." When Temari nodded, her mother continued, "I swear, there is something really wrong with that boy." Temari giggled and nodded again. "But," Suzura said and bumped Temari upwards with her arms, earning herself a squeal of delight from the little girl. "No, you're not in trouble, Temari-chan. Though maybe you should give him your doll to play with once in a while," she said, admonishing the girl slightly. Pouting immediately, Temari shook her head. "No, I don't want to. He always drools on everything." "Well, yes, he does that, I guess." Suzura nodded in agreement, causing her sleek blonde hair to fall into her eyes, immediately tucking it back behind one of her ears. "Oh, I know," she exclaimed, snapping her fingers. "How about we buy him his own doll this week?" Temari scrunched up her face as she pondered about this. Kankuro getting a doll just like that. That seemed hardly fair now, did it? "Can I have one too?" she finally asked softly and slowly, batting her eyelashes as she tried to impress her parent with her childish charm. "We'll see, okay." Suzura laughed, and set Temari on one arm, reaching for the door behind her with the other as she turned towards it. "Now, I've got something to show you, but close your eyes first, okay?" Okay, Temari said and closed her eyes, wondering what her mother was going to show her. Maybe it would be more toys for her to play with. Or maybe a pretty kimono like her mother wore so often. Maybe even some of those pretty and shiny metal things her mother was so fond of. Just barely able to contain her excitement, it took every ounce of Temari's willpower not to take a peek and spoil the surprise her mother had in store for her. Okay, Temari-chan, you can open your eyes now, her mother whispered in her ear and set her down on the ground. The little girl shivered in delight and beamed a brilliant smile. Opening her emerald eyes, she gasped and felt them grow wide and round like coins. Lying on a dusty old table in a dark room she had never entered before, was the biggest and most beautiful fan she had ever seen. Though no light seemed to filter in from anywhere, the perfect coat of onyx black varnish that covered the heavy sturdy wood seemed to shine. The tightly woven cloth between the two pieces of wood consisted of cotton and other materials, clearly meant to last for an eternity. Stepping in front of Temari, her mother picked up the fan and balanced it with both hands in front of the amazed little girl. With a flick of her wrist, Suzura unfolded it and revealed the cloth, which was painted a pale beige along with 3 circles with an equal spacing between them. They were the same color as the varnish on the wood. For me? Temari asked, her voice barely louder than a whisper. Yes, her mother said, her tone a deathly serious one, which unnerved her daughter a little bit. Listen to me carefully, Temari-chan. Tearing her eyes away from the beautiful fan, Temari looked Suzura in the eyes, staying silent so her mother could continue. Just in case I'm not going to be around when you get older, I want you to know about this. This fan is a very powerful tool, be sure to take care of it and it will take care of you. Do you understand? She asked, something flashing across her eyes which Temari could not identify because she had never experienced it herself. Sorrow. Yes, I understand, Temari said, somehow comprehending that this was a very serious matter. I'll protect Konkuro and my new brother or sister, right? Her mother gave a sad smile, rubbing her belly absent-mindedly. Yes, Temari-chan, become strong and protect them both, she said and refolded the fan, setting it back on the old table, the dust dulling the sound of wood hitting wood just barely. Grabbing Temari's small hands with one of her own and rubbed her daughter's head with the other. Suzura kneeled in front of her and bent forwards to place her lips on Temari's forehead. Just remember, Temari-chan, I love all of you so very much. An overly bright array of bright colors soothed Temari as she cracked her eyes open, and consequently shut them immediately with a groan. To make matters worse, her head felt like someone was continuously ringing a massive brass gong inside of it. Blindly grabbing the sides of her head with her hands, she gingerly started rubbing her temples in an effort to alleviate some of the pain she was experiencing. A small pressure near her head alerted her to the presence of someone else, but she had no idea who it was. She felt her hands gently being pushed away to be replaced by a pair of gruff and calloused hands that took over the pain-reducing effort. Temari couldn't help but smile. That feels good. We really have to stop meeting like this, Temari-chan. Her smile widened into a grin. What makes you say that, Naruto-kun? The massaging hands paused momentarily as Naruto chuckled somewhere above her face. Well, I kinda like being in your room and everything, but I don't like it when you or I have to have an accident for us to have some time to ourselves. Temari nodded in agreement but only slightly, even her neck hurt. What the hell happened? She asked. Everything before waking up just seemed like one big blur. She could hear Naruto sigh wearily. Me and Kakashi-sensei were training, and you and Kumiko went off to spar, remember? We heard this big explosion and I arrived just in time to see you lying smoking in a really big crater. Smoking? Temari inquired, smacking her lips, noticing just how thirsty she was. She really felt like a big pile of, well, crap. The weight pressing the TN mattress down above her head shifted slightly and she heard a clinking of glass, followed by the unmistakable sound of liquid being poured into said glass. Without opening her eyes, Temari tried to sit up, but was immediately pressed back down by Naruto. She was grateful, because every move just made her body ache painfully in places she had never known about before. With his help, Temari lifted her head slightly, her muscles groaning in silent protest, and felt a glass being pressed against her lips. She opened her mouth and eagerly downed the cool liquid inside. Temari had never been more grateful for a glass of water in her life. When she had swallowed the last gulp of water, and heard Naruto put down the glass on the tatami mat beside her futon with a dull clunk, Temari opened her eyes again. Her emerald eyes blinked rapidly for a few moments, allowing her to adapt to the light that shone through her windows. She tilted her chin slightly and looked upwards to see a grinning FACE with ruby and sapphire eyes look down at her. "Good morning," the face said simply. Temari grinned in return. "Good morning." Despite enjoying his tender ministrations, Temari really wanted to know what had happened, and therefore, with a soft groan escaping her lips, sat upright and leaned back against the blonde youth. "Smoking?" she inquired again. He. Yeah, you were kinda singed there, Temari-chan." Naruto laughed. "Looks like you and Kumiko-san went a little bit overboard." The buzzing in Temari's head multiplied tenfold upon hearing the girl's name, and flashes of the events that transpired the day before flashed in front of her eyes. A great ball of crackling energy, unleashed by that katana from Kumiko when she unleashed some technique she had never heard of, let alone seen with her own eyes. A rage unlike she had ever known filled her heart. What had happened to my fan? Temari shouted suddenly, jolting forwards and immediately regretting it as she clutched her head when waves of pain rolled throughout her skull. What happened to my fan? She tried again in a hoarse whisper. A profound sigh behind her told Temari all she needed to know, and she Lieutenant, her heart plummeted into the pit of her stomach. Naruto stood up from behind her and walked over to the side of her room, picking up a small nondescript brown sack she hadn't noticed up until now. Our eyes trailed the sack when Naruto sat back down, this time in front of her, and watched him empty it on her blanket. "I'm sorry, Temari-chan. We tried to find as much as we could, but..." Temari Street. If led a sob when she saw the remains of her most trustworthy weapon. The last remaining link to her mother was reduced to a pathetic collection of wood chips, splinters and singed scraps of cloth. Kumiko-san didn't mean for it to happen. Naruto began, unsure of what to say. How could he? He didn't know about the true meaning the fan had for Temari. Temari's emerald eyes blazed briefly before unshed tears brimmed at the edge of her eyelashes. "Kumiko, this is your fault. You're going to pay." With a deep and shuddering breath, she locked her eyes with the now ruby sapphire orbs of Naruto. The intensity of the emotion stirring in her emerald depths startled him, and he was now truly at a loss for what to do. He did the only thing he could think of and wrapped his arms around Temari's shoulders, pressing her gently against him. While most people would take that chance and let it all out, Temari tried to bottle up as much of her scrambled emotions as she could. She wanted to turn into something more useful than tears. Temari-chan. The sand nin clutched Naruto's black shirt, with the orange Uzumaki swirl so prominent on display on the back and front, his jacket lying forgotten, carelessly thrown over the only chair in her room. "Please, Naruto-kun. I need to be alone right now." A brief silence followed her words. "Are you sure?" he asked softly, not wanting to leave the girl when she was so obviously upset. "Please," Temari urged, setting her palms on his chest and pushing him away slightly. If he was going to stay any longer, she was sure she was going to crack and break down right then and there. She wouldn't be able to forgive herself if she did. Naruto's heart was torn. He really didn't want to leave Temari like this, but he didn't want to disrespect her wishes either. And to make matters worse, he had obligations elsewhere that needed to be fulfilled. He knew that Kakashi was waiting for him to continue their training, seeing it was cut short when Naruto rushed to Temari's aid when he had heard that deafening explosion the day before. But for all the pain the destroyed weapon caused Temari, if he didn't get stronger, the consequences could be direr than a destroyed weapon. Silently, Naruto looked down at his girlfriend, whose face was now obscured by her spiky sandy-colored hair as she stared at her lap. Finally deciding that enough was enough, he placed his hands on both of her cheeks and gently, but firmly, forced her to look at him. His eyes crinkled as his lips curved into a tender smile filled with unspoken understanding. Just before he leaned forwards and pressed them ever so gently on hers. He stayed like that for a long time, all the while, eroding and whittling away at Temari's erected barriers that kept her emotions, though barely in check. When he drew back to draw breath, a small crack appeared into the barrier. When he repeated his actions, once again placing his lips on her own, the crack widened, letting the emotions gush out without abandon. A small sob escaped the kunoichi, followed by another with their lips still pressed together. When Naruto ended the kiss, she couldn't hold back any longer and desperately clung to his body like a near-drowning swimmer would to a life raft on an endless ocean. The sobs followed each other in rapid succession now, and she squeezed Naruto with all the strength she had. Tears, like glittering diamonds, fell from between her scrunched-up eyelids, and leaked out from the sides of her eyes, unperturbed by the fact that the girl didn't want them to fall. The blonde boy rubbed her back and stroked her hair slowly, understanding the need for her to have an outlet, and began rocking her from side to side gently. Shish, Temari-chan, it's going to be alright. It's going to be alright. In Naruto's mind, things really couldn't get any worse. His somber face was a perfect reflection of that assessment and didn't go unnoticed by his sensei as he stood in front of him, trying to perfect the technique they had already spent 2 days practicing now. Naruto, what's wrong? Kakashi asked, tugging on his flak jacket after staring at the boy try, and subsequently fail, to concentrate on precisely regulating the necessary chakra to form a keen-edged katana that wasn't horrible oversized. Letting out a profound sigh, Naruto looked up to the silver-haired Junin. It's Temari-chan. Ah, Kakashi stated simply and smiled behind his mask. Girl problems huh, Naruto? He added with a wink. No, it's not like that, Naruto exclaimed, waving his hands in front of him wildly to accentuate his point. There's just something really wrong. She's been really sad since that fight with Kumiko-san. Really, I would have thought she'd be happy. She did more or less beat Kumiko, didn't she? Indeed, even though Temari had been knocked unconscious, scant seconds later, the girl who she'd been sparring with, exhausted, bruised and just all round beaten up, followed her to mental oblivion soon after. In a way, she was worse off than Temari. Her wounds would no doubt take longer to heal. After she had woken up, she had expressed her regret at having attacked Temari with that particular jutsu, even though she had powered it down considerably to avoid any permanent damage. And she just didn't realize the low voltage lightning strike would blow up Temari's prized battle fan when her lightning-imbued katana connected with it. No, I don't think that's it, Naruto said hesitantly, rubbing his chin with his thumb and index finger. I think it has something to do with her fan. But, if it's just a weapon, she can just buy a new one, right? Kakashi let out, mirroring his student's pensive gestures. I don't know, Naruto. There might have been something special about that weapon. Tools or no, shinobi can get very attached to them. Oh, really? Not knowing what else to say, Naruto lowered his eyes and stuck his hands into the pockets of his comfortable black jacket. Wiggling his hands about, his right hand suddenly touched a small grubby package and fished it out. Inspecting it closely, he recognized it as the thing he had bought days ago, on the day they all went to the Hokage's office to receive their mission briefing. The package was still in its original packaging, a plain dull brown wrapping paper, bound tightly closed with an ordinary bleached string. Naruto could have smacked himself in the head. Why hadn't he given this to Temari in the first place? It was bound to cheer her up. Kakashi-sensei, he said excitedly and held the package up before him. Naruto, you bought something for me, Kakashi interjected, swiping the package out of his student's hands and already started to unwrap it. No, Naruto started after a brief moment of surprise, but was again interrupted by the Junin who had finished unwrapping the package and had lifted it to eye level to inspect it. Naruto, what would I need this for? This would be more appropriate for a girl you know. I know that, Naruto shouted angrily and stole the item back, coveting it with both of his hands. It's for Temari-chan, not for you, Kakashi-sensei. Sorry about that, Naruto. The silver-haired Junin chuckled and rubbed the back of his head before his visible eye drooped sadly. But, he muttered softly and turned around to face away from the blonde boy. It would have been nice if a student of mine would have bought something for his poor old teacher. Kakashi-sensei, Naruto began softly, his anger having left him like a popped balloon. I didn't know. Haha, just kidding. Kakashi laughed, the drooping eye now curved in a happy crinkle as he turned around once more. A cluster of veins threatened to explode on Naruto's forehead as he raised a shaking fist and clenched his teeth tightly. Kakashi-sensei, he growled, a score of threats left unspoken but made oh so clear. The older man must have noticed it, because he quickly cleared his throat and spoke up. So, you bought that for Temari? Why yeah, Naruto stuttered, slightly confused from jumping from one emotion to the next. And let his arms drop feebly to his sides yet clutched the package securely with his right fist. The Junin bent over slightly to stare Naruto squarely in the eyes. She'll love it, a silly grin framing his face, and ruby sapphire eyes downcast. Naruto nodded. I hope so. Behind his mask, Kakashi smiled. You are truly one of a kind, Naruto. The next day found Temari walking across the quiet streets of Konoha, walking aimlessly to clear her whirling mind after she had been able to drag herself from her room. Not even the precious rays of sunlight that filtered through small holes of the clouds above could lift her saddened spirit. Even though she didn't want to admit it, she had felt slightly relieved after crying on the shoulder of the 1P person she knew she could trust above all others. In just a short time, Naruto had grown more precious to her than even her own brothers. Gaara used to be a homicidal maniac, and Kankuro a plain whiny person, but they were still family. Still, they just didn't seem to compare to the bubbling youth that now occupied a very special place in her heart. Yet even though the Kunoichi knew she was being silly, she couldn't help but feel ashamed as well. This, coupled with the overwhelming feeling of being unable to do anything about her current situation, angered her. Temari fantasized about making the white-haired girl pay for causing her so much grief. Two things stopped her from actually playing out one of the fantasies. 1. She really didn't think Naruto would appreciate her killing his new teammate. 2. Aside from upsetting the person she now cared so intensely for, all of her fantasies seemed to come to a very messy end, which would no doubt result in her being kicked out of Konoha along with her brothers. Or worse. A stifled scream of exasperation escaped her lips and she glared at the ground before focusing her attention on a small piece of rock, worn smooth over the amount of time it had lain there. Now it just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. With her pent-up frustration and the awkward feeling of helplessness reaching a boiling point, she kicked the innocent stone with the point of her sandaled foot with all her strength. The rock pelted haphazardly through the air at near supersonic speeds, and Temari felt insurmountably better, until she ringed unwillingly when she heard someone cursing just a few yards away. Ouch! Holy crap, what the hell was that? Temari narrowed her emerald eyes and stared in the direction where the masculine voice shouted from. That lazy drawl even though he was obviously in pain. That odd black pineapple hairdo. That insufferable scowl on his uncaring face. Eyes widening in recognition, Temari pointed a near-accusing finger at him. You, what are you doing here? What? The black-haired young man shouted in return. What are you talking about? I live here, you troublesome woman. What did you do that for? Temari was about to respond, but the victim of her rock bullet apparently wasn't done venting his indignation about the current situation. Damn it, I can't even walk around anymore. Stupid women hurting me just for the fun it. They never leave me alone. Why me? Damn it. Hey, Temari screeched. She was glad to have someone on whom she could shamelessly vent her emotions on before she would, quite literally, explode. Shut up, you lazy bastard. I thought things were always too troublesome for you. Why are you getting so worked up over this? The boy stomped over to the sand nin who now leant back slightly, placing the back of her hands on her hips and sticking her chin into the air defiantly. My name is Shikamaru, address me properly. I'll get worked over this if I damn well feel like it. I'm tired of being pushed around by you people. By you people, the Chunin of course meant the female gender. All of Temari's spiky pigtails swayed back and forth and up and down as she unperturbedly continued her verbal lashing of her unsuspecting victim. Like hell I'll address you properly, you egghead. Egghead. Shikamaru blinked in surprise, before his dark eyes narrowed in anger. You woman strut around all high and mighty all the time, what in Kami-sama's name do you stick up your ass to make you act this cranky? With that comment, something inside Temari's had snapped like a brittle twig. Blood was pumped by the bucket load to her face, making her almond-shaped eyes feel like they were nearly going to pop out of their sockets, and made her face redden increasingly. She wanted to maim. To kill. To just hurt someone. Anyone. Judging from the fact that Shikamaru's anger dissolved for the dawn of slight fear, the unspoken message was made quite clear to the budding Chunin. Thinking quickly, and silently thanking whatever spirits were out there for his intelligence, Shikamaru formed a single-hand seal and muttered something under his breath. Reason having completely left her, Temari didn't recognize the seal that should have been obvious to her and stoked the flames of her burning rage fiercely. But when she wanted to move forward and wring the boy's neck and ultimately squash it like an overripe piece of fruit, she found her body unresponsive as it had been only once before. Her anger only dying down slightly due to surprise, Temari roared at him. "Release me, damn you!" Shikamaru's frown hid the slight feeling of fear he had felt just moments ago. Exchanging verbal insults with a woman was all well and good, but really, Temari didn't seem to want to stop until she had actually killed someone. In this unfortunate case, him. "Geez, calm down will you?" he said in a lazy drawl, recovering from his own uncharacteristic outburst, which only served to irritate the girl further. Calm down, she screamed at him, flecks of spittle scent flying as her behavior grew more and more hysterical. "Don't tell me to calm down, you asshole. Release me now." Shikamaru closed his eyes for a moment, trying to adapt to the increasing strain of Temari rebelling against his technique, before he penned them and stared at her enraged features silently. "Man, what's wrong with her? She's scary," he thought as a few droplets of sweat began to roll down his temples. He tried to ignore the raw-ing girl as she very nearly began to foam in the mouth with all her cursing and snarling. But after years of watching clouds and playing strategic board games, he had patience to spare. It seemed to him that it would do them both some good if he would just keep silent for a while. Not that he had any problem doing that anyway. Temari wasn't aware of the amount of time that was passing. All she wanted to do was exact holy vengeance on the infidel that had dared restrain her. "Screw the consequences," was the unspoken motto that ran through her head constantly. Someone was going to pay, whether the unlucky target of her rage was innocent or not, she didn't care anymore. Why was everyone in this whole village against her? Why were they all intent on making her suffer? Those were the questions that dominated Temari's mind. But immediately as she began to think about those two questions, another small part of her mind piped up in defiance. "Is that really true? Someone doesn't you know?" Temari didn't really know how to respond to that. "Yeah, someone doesn't," she agreed with that little part of her mind. But when that thought hit her, it was as if a stopper was being unplugged somewhere, and drained her of her anger at a frighteningly rapid pace. Yet Temari didn't want it to go, and tried to remain enraged. It was so much easier than. "Hey, are you done now?" Shikamaru asked, interrupting her thoughts. Emerald eyes swiveled to look at the black-haired youth who still kept her prisoner with his trademark technique. Shikamaru was startled to find another emotion flitting across her eyes so quickly. "Are all women like that?" he questioned himself. He was thoroughly amazed, if somewhat annoyed, that she seemed to go from anger to what seemed to be sadness so quickly. What in the world would she be sad about? Indeed, even though he had only met her a couple of times, Shikamaru had actually thought that Temari would have been able to take all the crap show veld on top of her and brush it off as if it was nothing, and then some. Well, that and she would probably use that super oversized fan of hers and beat it to death. "Speaking of which, is this because of that dumb fan of yours?" Shikamaru stated bluntly, finding it too troublesome to beat around the bush. Temari's eyes narrowed slightly before she averted her gaze and muttered something softly. "That's none of your business. Let me go." With one dark eyebrow nearly disappearing into his scalp, Shikamaru folded his arms in front of his chest with Temari mirroring his movements unwillingly. "Why are you being so weak?" Shikamaru asked, taking one step closer to her and subsequently forcing the kunoichi to do the same. "What? I'm not being." Temari began hotly before Shikamaru silenced her by speaking up himself. "Yeah, you are. What? Are you pissed off because your weapon blew up?" Mouth opening and closing like a goldfish drifting aimlessly in a bowl of water, unable to get away from the intense scrutiny of its owner, Temari remained silent. Shikamaru took that as a yes. And now you're pissed off at that white-haired girl for destroying it. For being stronger than you. She wasn't stronger than me. She was just lucky, Temari retorted, wanting to get away from his unrelenting questions. What a hassle. Shikamaru sighed and shook his head from side to side slowly. Then why are you getting so angry? Can't you just buy a new one and kick her ass in a rematch or something? That's exactly the problem. I can't buy a new one. It was very. Temari blurted it out before she knew what had happened and proceeded to mentally kick herself for letting it slip. Ah, now we're getting somewhere. Shikamaru thought to himself. It was what? One of a kind. Very valuable to you. Was it from some dead relative or something? Shut up. That's none of your damn business. Now leave me alone, she shouted in vain, before returning to glare fruitlessly at the ground. Feeling he had hit the jackpot there, Shikamaru wanted to give her a piece of advice before he would let her go. Because in all honesty, it was becoming increasingly difficult to remain his hold on the woman, and he just wanted to be alone for a while. With no women annoying him. Man, it's way too troublesome to hold on to grudges, you know. Just let it go. Get a new weapon or something. I doubt the one who gave you that stupid thing in the first place would want you to get so worked up over this. Whether she liked it or not, his words hit home, and she was too startled by the blatant obviousness of it that she didn't immediately notice him releasing her. Only when she heard a soft grinding of sandals and the gritty sidewalk she currently found herself on, did she look up again. Having turned his back on Temari, Shikamaru spared her a final glance over his shoulder. Stop being so angry, it makes you even more troublesome than you were before. And without waiting for a reply, he strode away, hands casually stuck in his front pockets. She wanted to scream, to cry or blow something up. But for some reason, she felt herself unable to do anything but stare at the seemingly perpetually bored Chunin until he disappeared around a corner in the distance. Temari stood there for a few moments longer, trying to process everything that had transpired just now, until with a faint smile, she turned around as well and headed home. Whether he had intended it or not, it seemed that Shikamaru's words had helped Temari more than he could possibly know. Even though she would probably never forgive Kumiko for destroying her most precious possession, she would divert her energy to more worthwhile tasks. After all, they had a mission coming up soon, and Temari would not become a burden to anyone. Lee-kun, Lee-kun, Sakura yelled energetically as she ran towards a boy with a peculiar bowl haircut. Sakura-chan, Lee smiled. You're early. The pink-haired Kunoichi smiled in return and skidded to a halt a few feet in front of her training partner, nearly slipping on the slick grass. Yeah, Shizune-sensei let me go early. She told me I was doing really well. Great job. Lee congratulated her, giving her a thumbs up and a toothy smile that sparkled even without the aid of direct sunlight. Youth power will prevail. Sakura grinned and nodded happily, returning the hand gesture. Hell yeah. Unable to keep up the pretense, Sakura quickly broke down into a peal of giggles. Even if she had often called Lee and his antics creepy, she loved the way he could make her smile and laugh. There was just nothing above the feeling of being able to cut loose and be silly with someone. Lee, on the other hand, loved to make Sakura laugh. In the aftermath of bringing back Sasuke, he found she didn't smile or laugh nearly enough anymore. Even if it were short moments like this, he treasured them dearly. Because despite his promises to himself, Sakura-chan, Lee muttered sadly, trying his best to keep his face neutral. Did you say something, Lee-kun? The pink-haired girl asked, fingering her braid as she shifted her gaze from the sky to the taijutsu user. Oh, Lee exclaimed, surprised that she had heard him, and began waving his hands in front of him frantically. No, it's nothing, Sakura-chan. Sakura uttered and closed the distance between the two of them by a few steps to look him squarely in the eyes. You are sure acting weird today, Lee-kun, she stated bluntly. With a blush staining his cheeks, Lee jumped backwards and struck his favorite, good guy, pose once more. Really, it's nothing. Now let's go train some more. You want to be prepared as much as you can for your most important mission. Thinking better than pursue the route of questioning Lee further about his odd behavior, Sakura nodded slowly and began moving towards the middle of the field to begin her daily exercise. Lee let out a small sigh of relief. I'm sorry Guy-sensei. I'm too cowardly to bare my heart to my beloved Sakura-chan. He thought to himself, apologizing to his mentor for his lack of courage. But when he heard Sakura shout out to him, waving him over with a radiant smile, he felt his insides turn to jelly. Maybe after your mission. Wait for me, Sakura-chan. Why are you doing this? A voice asked, startling a timid girl with short navy blue hair who was currently busying herself with arranging several day-to-day items in one of her cabinets in her room. Neji Ni-san, what are you doing here? The girl stuttered, turning around to look at a boy with bandaged arms folded across his chest. The black-haired youth blinked slowly before he stared intently into the girl's pupil-less aquamarine eyes. Why are you doing this, Hinata-sama? He repeated himself, purposely ignoring her question. Well, Hinata stuttered. Even with the improved relationship with her cousin, she still seemed unable to relax in his presence and began fumbling with her fingers as she always did when she was nervous. A near inaudible sigh reached her ears and she lowered her eyes reflexively. A dull clunking came closer and with a squeak, she felt her hands being grabbed by those of her cousin. She looked up into his eyes, expecting to see a disapproving frown, or at least a scowl that told her he was displeased with her. Yet she only saw a neutral expression, and maybe a small glimmer of concern. He doesn't love you like you do him, Neji stated calmly, correctly guessing what troubled her. I know, she breathed, lowering her eyes once more. But I have to see him one more time before he goes away. With what seemed a comforting squeeze, Neji let her hands go and turned around to walk out of Hinata's bedroom. Pausing momentarily at the doorpost, he turned around to say something. Hinata-sama, do not worry, there will be others. Hinata looked up, surprised, but found that Neji had already disappeared from view. She shook her head from side to side. Her cousin's actions still puzzled her. True, he still acted cold towards, well, nearly everyone and everything, but it was different than before. Normally it was disdain, and you always knew he looked down on you. But now, shaking her head more forcefully, Hinata cleared her mind of those thoughts. Today would be the last time she would pine over the spike-haired boy she had admired for so long. With strides filled with purpose, she exited her room and walked through the near cavernous hallways of the Hyuga Manor. Hinata would finally allow herself closure from the boy that had unknowingly granted her so much happiness and pain. The week had gone by fast for Naruto. Aside from sleeping and eating, he barely had any time to himself. Nearly every waking moment had been spent on trying to perfect the technique his sensei, Kakashi, had developed for him. And even though he still had some trouble with it, he was able to form a suitable length for the blade he was supposed to learn how to wield properly. For Kumiko, who trained a few yards away from Kakashi and Naruto as they kept trying to mold a large amount of chakra into a form that resembled a sharp-edged katana, the trials of Naruto were slightly comical. The variations of Naruto's attempts were as different as night and day. One moment he overdid it, resulting in a towering and unwieldy blade that had sliced a poor old tree through the middle when he had stumbled, while on the next, he conserved too much chakra, which produced a diminutive knife barely fit for slicing an apple. Yet for all his failures, Naruto persevered and had finally begun learning the basic sword techniques from the Hidden Moon refugee. Though Kumiko had learned him a lot in such a short time, she probably would have taught him more had she not been clutching her midsection in a fit of giggles due to Naruto's antics. For some reason, the blonde boy managed to mess up every single kata she had demonstrated. The most memorable moment had been when he was supposed to spread his legs, but seeing it had rained earlier that day, he slipped, resulting in a wonky sort of banana split that made Naruto moan in agony, and made Kakashi wince and groan in sympathy. Despite all of the trials and tribulations, Naruto's unwillingness to give up shone through. And though he was far from being able to compare to any master swordsman, he knew enough so he wouldn't cut himself, or others, by accident, and would be able to attack any possible enemies with some basic moves. Even with these things to keep him busy, Naruto juggled the rest of his time between spending it with Temari and spending a few precious hours with her brother, Gaara. Naruto had decided to take him out and head into the village to do something fun. Sadly, When Naruto meant to do something fun, it usually resulted in going to the only place where he was truly comfortable when he wasn't at home. Ichiraku Ramen Bar. Gaara, on the other hand, didn't find this truly upsetting. After all, he had never experienced a social life of any kind back in Sunagaku. And even though he didn't find ramen nearly as delicious as the hyperactive blonde seated next to him, who was slurping away bowls upon bowls of the soupy brew, he was grateful for someone going out of his way to willingly spend time with him. Gaara was still quite ignorant of the whole friendship thing, but if it included spending time with people that actually seemed to like him, he figured that it couldn't be half that bad. The day before their mission would have had actually started, Naruto wanted to spend the full day with his still brand new girlfriend. He wanted to know everything about her. Suspiciously enough, Kakashi had given him the day off to do something for himself that day. His suspicions were well founded, because when he had dragged Temari away from one of Konoha's many training fields to take a leisurely walk across the village, he was whisked away by a hulking figure seated atop a frog the size of a small house. It had been none other than the perverted hermit, Jiraiya. After screaming himself hoarse over a period of 30 minutes, Naruto had nearly emptied his vocabulary of curses and doom-inspiring threats. When he paused to draw in large gulps of precious air and a few sips of water from a nearby brook that crisscrossed across a small field the Sennin had taken him to, Jiraiya took the opportunity to first whack him hard over the head for his insolence and then proceeded to inspect the new changes Naruto had gone through seemingly overnight. Naruto seethed as the old man prodded and poked him, uttering nothing else than several hums and I sees, before he slapped the massive hands away from his body and demanded an explanation on why he had been taken so suddenly. Jiraiya, of course, first had to live up to his self-proclaimed title of super pervert before he gave an answer. Thus, the next 15 minutes had been spent talking to and questioning Naruto about things that made his face go aflame and made him sure that his head would pop off his body if it would have continued any longer. Luckily though, the hermit took pity on him and explained to him why he had taken Naruto to their remote location. When he had finished, Naruto was left standing stunned. It seemed that Jiraiya wasn't going to teach him any new flashy new jutsus, or a brand new technique of any kind. But he was going to refine one that Naruto already knew. Beef. Or the blonde genin had a chance to object though. Jiraiya shut him up with the simple promise that if he mastered this, a brand new way of fighting would be open to him. After that, and with surprisingly little resistance from Naruto, the hermit and his ad hoc student had spent the rest of the day going through the training Jiraiya had set out for Naruto. When all was said and done, Naruto was allowed to drag his sweaty and tired self back home, where he promptly fell asleep on the doorstep with his jacket half removed from his being and his keys still wedged in the lock of the front door. Gaara, never one to sleep much, if indeed at all, quickly noticed the slight commotion and swiftly dumped Naruto on the exhausted blonde's own futon. Blessed with the ability to be refreshed after a single night's rest though, Naruto was already jumping about in the early morning, though the jumping was mostly caused by a very sadistic Kankuro, who didn't want to be late because of a snoring. Naruto and had dumped a bucket full of icy water over him. His gloating over the wet sputtering and frantic scrambling of Naruto was cut short however, when he turned around and came eye to eye with a very angry Temari. Subsequently, and with only one punch, Kankuro was sent flying through the entire length of the significant hallway of the second floor, and now nursed a bump that threatened to become the size of a small mountain. After a hearty breakfast, and with Sakura swinging by so they could all leave together, though first they had to revive the pink-haired girl who had fainted when she saw the changed Naruto. The group of 6 genins went off to the main gate of Konoha. So Naruto found himself now, walking hand in hand with Temari, answering her questions about his abduction the day before. Temari's brothers, Sakura and Kumiko, trailed only a slight distance behind. I mean, Ero Sennin can be so annoying, Naruto exclaimed. Temari laughed. But it wasn't all that bad though, right? Squeezing her hand affectionately, Naruto shook his head. No, it wasn't. It was actually pretty cool what he had to teach me, but I can't tell you guys what it is though. He made me promise. Ugh, seriously, you guys make me sick. Came a disgusted mutter from behind them. Shut up, Kankuro. Temari shot back, her mirth quickly gone from her voice. Jealous are you? Kumiko chimed, eager to annoy the puppet user, and directed a wink at Gaara, who had turned his head to watch the brewing confrontation between the girl and his brother. What? No, Kankuro spluttered, outraged. How dare you? Quite easily. Doll boy. Damn it. I'll kill. Please, Kumiko-san, Kankuro-san, be quiet. It's still early, people are sleeping. Sakura interrupted, playing the peacemaker. In truth, her nerves were on edge. Sakura was eager to prove herself on this mission, and wasn't sure if she could take any backhanded sniping of each other's traits during the trip to meet up with Kakashi. Things sure had changed recently, and Kankuro wasn't sure if he liked it. Due to Naruto's odd growth spurt, Kankuro was unable to take advantage of his previous height advantage. It didn't have that much of an effect in the first place, but he liked to think so anyway. Now, the new resident, Kumiko, with her face still slightly bruised from her fight with his sister, had taken to continuously annoy him. Kankuro folded his arms across his chest after making sure his two puppets were still fastened securely on his back and let out a sound of indignation, which in turn produced a broad grin on Kumiko's face. Nearby, undetected by the small group, Hinata stalked across the nearby rooftops, taking occasional peeks at the two figures who led the group. Even though the sight of Naruto being so close with the girl from the hidden sand village whom she barely knew about hurt her unlike anything else she had experienced before, a small pained smile curved her lips. Heart hammering in her chest and fingers clenching almost painfully on the edge of a large wooden sign she hid behind, she snuck a final glance at the duo. Naruto-kun, I'm happy for you, she whispered softly and disappeared, leaving nothing else than a single teardrop on the wooden boards as proof of her ever being been there. A short distance away, Naruto suddenly stopped and turned around. What's wrong? Temari asked, confused. Naruto uttered, taking a few more seconds to scan his surroundings before turning around once more to face Temari. Oh, nothing, Temari-chan. I just thought. He paused, unsure of himself. I just thought that someone was watching us, that's all. Temari stared at him for a few seconds, her emerald eyes taking in the true concern apparent on his features. Then placed her lips briefly on his cheek before tugging on his hand to entice him to continue walking again. Come on, Naruto-kun. Let's go. 15 minutes later, 5 of which spent waiting for a certain silver-haired Junin. A record for him, they were sure. They found themselves before the imposing gates of Konoha. Kakashi had promised them to brief them while they walked, and without waiting for any response, walked towards the pair of guards that stood before the gate. A brief conversation, and a fair few of suspicious glares directed at the Sand siblings and Naruto later, the gate consisting of rows upon rows of very large and thick tree trunks, was slowly being swung open with deafening creaks to let the party out. Kakashi took in the different responses that were silently so silently being portrayed by the 6 genins. Naruto, of course, made his joy apparent loudly, eliciting a few giggles from Temari as she tried in vain to curb his outrageous nature. He didn't know what Gaara thought, but then again Kakashi thought hardly anyone would be able to see past that calm exterior of his. Sakura, naturally, growled in annoyance to Naruto's antics, and Kankuro seemed positively giddy with glee of being able to escape from being cooped up in Konohagakure. But Kakashi was most worried about Kumiko, with so little time having passed of the tragedy that had befallen her and her clan. He had protested with having his team being put on this mission so soon. But after a lengthy talk with the 5th Hokage, she had convinced him of the necessity of going on this mission with all of them. He just hoped they would be able to get it over with soon, and seeing Kumiko look so worried as well, Kakashi was sure she agreed with him. Suzura is a play on suzerain, which means lily of the valley. Seemed like a fitting name for the Sand siblings' mother. Kanagawa means valley river. Kata, a string of basic body positioning and movement exercises. You could say it is some kind of dance. Thank you for watching. Guys, do subscribe to this channel.